History is full of blank pages where entire chapters should be. Civilizations, cities, and peoples have vanished, leaving behind only silent ruins and unanswered questions. Why do these ancient disappearances, after decades or even centuries of study, still spark such intense arguments among the world's top archaeologists and historians? This journey explores 30 of history's greatest vanishing acts. Each case is a unique puzzle where the evidence is incomplete, contradictory, or wide open for interpretation. By the end, you will understand the profound debates that define our search for the lost. You will see how a single word carved in wood or a city swallowed by the sea can fracture expert opinion for generations. What common thread do you think connects all these great mysteries of the past? The story of the lost colony of Roanoke is where our modern fascination with historical vanishings truly begins. In the late 1580s, a group of over 100 English men, women, and children established a fragile settlement on Roanoke Island, off the coast of what is now North Carolina. Their governor, John White, sailed back to England for desperately needed supplies. War with Spain delayed his return for 3 long years. When he finally made it back in 1590, he found the settlement utterly deserted. The houses were dismantled, the fort was empty, and there was no sign of struggle. The only clue was a single word carved into a wooden post, Croatoan, and the letters CRO carved into a tree. Over 100 souls had simply ceased to exist. This single word has fueled centuries of debate. One prominent theory suggests the colonists, facing hardship, split into smaller groups and sought refuge with the nearby Croatoan people, a Native American tribe, eventually intermarrying and assimilating completely. Other historians point to the severe tensions with other local groups, suggesting a conflict may have led to a tragic outcome. There is also the possibility they attempted to sail to a safer location, perhaps Chesapeake Bay, and were lost at sea. The harsh reality of illness and starvation in a new land is another grim possibility. The frustrating truth is that archaeological evidence on Roanoke Island itself is shockingly sparse, offering no clear proof for any one scenario. This creates a vacuum where interpretation reigns, and every new fragment of pottery or map annotation sparks fresh arguments. Roanoke established a haunting template, a European settlement vanishing into the American wilderness, leaving behind a puzzle made of whispers and a single, tantalizing word. That single carved word on Roanoke Island represents a mystery on a human scale, a community lost within living memory. But some vanishings shake the very foundations of an age. Leap back over 3,000 years to the glittering island of Crete in the Bronze Age Mediterranean. Here, the Minoan civilization flourished, a society of astonishing sophistication and grace. They were not warriors celebrated in epic poems, but traders, artists, and architects. Their sprawling palace complexes, like the legendary labyrinth of Knossos, were marvels of engineering, complete with advanced plumbing, vibrant frescoes depicting bull leapers and serene goddesses, and a written language, Linear A, that remains undeciphered. This was a culture seemingly at peace with itself and the world. Then, around 1450 before the Common Era, the lights went out. The Minoan world did not simply fade, it underwent a dramatic and relatively rapid collapse. Their grand palaces were violently destroyed, their trade networks disintegrated, and their unique culture was fundamentally extinguished. It is crucial to understand this was a cultural and political disappearance, not necessarily the elimination of a people. The population likely remained, but their way of life, their governance, and their artistic spirit were gone, overwritten by a new order. This pivotal moment divides experts into 2 passionate camps, each armed with compelling but incomplete evidence. The first theory points to a cataclysm of almost unimaginable scale. Just north of Crete lies the volcanic island of Thera, modern-day Santorini. Sometime in the 17th or 16th century before the Common Era, Thera exploded in one of the largest volcanic eruptions in human history. The blast would have been heard across continents, and the ensuing tsunamis, some towering over 100 feet high, would have smashed into the northern coast of Crete with devastating force, obliterating ports, coastal settlements, and the Minoan fleet, the very source of their wealth and power. The ashfall would have blotted out the sun for years, crippling agriculture across the region. Proponents of this theory see the eruption as an existential shock from which the delicate, palace-centered Minoan economy could never recover, leaving them vulnerable and broken. The opposing theory argues for a more human cause, conquest. From mainland Greece, the more militaristic Mycenaean culture was rising. Archaeological layers at Knossos and other sites clearly show destruction by fire, but the debate is what caused the flames. Did natural disaster create a power vacuum, or did the Mycenaeans see a weakened rival and seize their opportunity? Evidence shows Mycenaean influence and eventually Mycenaean script, Linear B, appearing in Crete after the collapse, suggesting a takeover. The archaeological record presents a frustrating puzzle, destruction layers that could be from earthquake, tsunami, or torch, often found intertwined. Was it the fury of the earth or the ambition of man that erased this brilliant civilization from history's stage? This debate over primary cause, environmental catastrophe versus human conflict, echoes far beyond the Aegean Sea. The debate over the fall of the Minoans between earth and empire finds a profound echo in a civilization even more mysterious and just as silent. Far to the east, in the vast floodplains of the Indus River, another brilliant society reached its zenith and then simply walked away. The Indus Valley civilization, also known as the Harappan culture, was a marvel of the ancient world. From around 2600 to 1900 before the Common Era, its great cities, Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, thrived. These were not haphazard collections of huts, but masterpieces of urban planning. They were laid out in precise grids with standardized bricks, sophisticated drainage systems that ran beneath the streets, and impressive public baths. This was a society of remarkable order and apparent social harmony, with little archaeological evidence of palaces for mighty kings or grand temples for warrior gods. Their artistry is seen in intricate seals, delicate beadwork, and enigmatic figurines. And then, over the course of a few centuries, this meticulously ordered world unraveled. The great cities were not destroyed in a dramatic conquest, they were meticulously abandoned. People left their homes and the sands slowly reclaimed the streets. The why of this quiet exodus is one of archaeology's most stubborn puzzles, made infinitely more difficult by the civilization's own voice, which we cannot hear. The Harappans left behind a written script found on thousands of those small stone seals. It is a script of elegant but unknown symbols. To this day, despite countless attempts, it remains undeciphered. It is a locked diary of an entire civilization, and without the key, we are left guessing at the final chapter. The major theories for their dispersal reflect a search for causes without clear villains. A dominant line of thought points to environmental shifts. Research suggests the climate may have grown drier, and the life-giving course of the Indus River, the very artery of their civilization, could have shifted dramatically through natural processes. This would have crippled the agricultural surplus that supported those vast, complex cities. Another possibility is that the land itself was overused, its fertility exhausted by centuries of intensive farming. Some geologists point to evidence of tectonic activity that might have altered river courses or made the region more prone to devastating floods. Then there is the long-debated cultural theory, the hypothetical arrival of Indo-Aryan-speaking migrants from the northwest. Earlier 20th century scholars often framed this as an invasion that overthrew the Harappans, but modern archaeology finds no layer of ash, no smashed walls, no evidence of a violent conquest at the major urban centers. This lack of clear martial evidence is what makes the environmental explanation so compelling, yet also so contested. If the river moved and the rains failed, why did the people not simply rebuild elsewhere along the new banks? Why did their unique cultural identity, their script, their systems of measurement fade away entirely? The silence of those undeciphered seals means we may never know if they left behind a warning, a prayer, or a simple record of their final days. Their disappearance is a quiet, profound mystery of adaptation and loss, where a society did not fall to the sword, but perhaps simply dissolved back into the landscape from which it came. That quiet dissolution of the Indus cities stands in stark contrast to another disappearance, one where the monuments left behind are impossible to ignore. Across the world, in the humid lowlands of the Mexican Gulf Coast, the Olmec built the first great civilization of Mesoamerica. They are often called the mother culture, the foundational society from which later powers like the Maya and the Aztec would draw their gods, their astronomy, and their artistic traditions. Their legacy is carved in colossal stone, in the famous giant heads with their stoic, helmeted faces, each one a portrait of a powerful ruler weighing many tons. For centuries, their heartland thrived. The great centers of San Lorenzo and later La Venta were hubs of ceremony, trade, and political power, with towering earthen pyramids and elaborate plazas aligned with celestial events. And then these core cities were abandoned. The jungle crept back over the massive stone heads and the grand platforms, swallowing them whole for over 1,000 years. This was not the end of Olmec influence, which radiated out and shaped an entire cultural region, but it was the end of their central authority. The question that divides experts is not if they left, but why they left their sacred capitals behind. One line of evidence points to human conflict within their own society. At San Lorenzo, many of the monumental sculptures, including the iconic heads, were deliberately mutilated and defaced before being carefully buried in long lines. This was not the random vandalism of invaders, but a systematic, ritualized destruction. Some archaeologists see this as clear evidence of a popular uprising, a rebellion that toppled the ruling elite and shattered the political order, leading the people to abandon the seat of that disgraced power. Other researchers look to the environment. The Olmec heartland was a landscape they had heavily engineered, with intensive agriculture supporting a dense population. It is possible they pushed the land too far, leading to soil exhaustion or erosion that undermined the food supply. Others point to evidence of significant volcanic activity in the region during the relevant period, which could have blanketed fields with ash or altered river systems crucial for transport and farming. Then there is a more nuanced theory that this was not a collapse at all, but a deliberate cultural shift. Perhaps the ruling class, facing mounting ecological or social pressures, made a conscious decision to relocate their centers of power to new, more sustainable locations, taking their knowledge and traditions with them and leaving the old stone cities as ceremonial ghosts. The debate hinges on interpreting the pace of the abandonment. Was it a rapid catastrophe that forced a panicked exodus, or a slow, managed decline where communities gradually drifted away over generations? The defaced monuments suggest a dramatic, punctuated event, while the lack of evidence for widespread violence or sudden natural disaster argues for a slower process. The Olmec heartland presents a profound puzzle, a mother culture that stepped back from its own hearth, leaving its children to build new fires elsewhere, forever wondering what finally made their ancestors walk away from those colossal stone faces staring silently into the encroaching green. The silent stone faces of the Olmec gaze upon a mystery of abandonment, a theme repeated with haunting resonance in the arid canyons of the American Southwest. Here, a people once known as the Anasazi, a Navajo term meaning ancient enemy or ancient ones, built their world into the very cliffs themselves. Today, scholars and their modern descendants prefer the name Ancestral Puebloans, honoring their living legacy in contemporary Pueblo communities. For centuries, these ancestors thrived, constructing vast, intricate apartment complexes of stone and mortar tucked beneath soaring canyon rims, like the awe-inspiring cliff palace at Mesa Verde. They were master farmers, astronomers, and artists, their lives woven into a delicate balance with a demanding land. Then, around 1300 Common Era, in a span of perhaps a single generation, they walked away from these magnificent dwellings forever. They left behind grinding stones, pottery, even sandals, as if planning to return for a day's work that never came. This was not a slow fading, but a decisive, regional exodus that still puzzles researchers. The evidence they left behind tells a complex and sometimes troubling story. At some sites, archaeologists have found signs of conflict not previously seen in their history. There are structures that appear hastily fortified, and some resting places show evidence of a violent end, suggesting a period of social upheaval or warfare. This physical evidence fractures scholarly opinion, forcing a confrontation with uncomfortable possibilities in a society long romanticized for its harmony with nature. One dominant explanation points squarely at the sky. Tree ring data, a precise record of climate history, reveals a devastating 24-year megadrought that gripped the region right at the time of the departure. In an environment where every drop of water was meticulously collected and managed, a drought of this scale would have been catastrophic, collapsing the agricultural foundation of their society. Proponents of this environmental theory argue that no social structure could withstand such a prolonged ecological shock. Yet others counter that these people had survived droughts before. They suggest the true cause was a collapse from within, perhaps growing social inequality, religious turmoil, or conflict over dwindling resources that shattered community cohesion. Could it have been a combination, they ask, where the stress of drought ignited latent social tensions? Another thread considers external pressure from migrating groups entering the region, possibly introducing new conflicts that made the cliff dwellings untenable. The key to the mystery may lie in where they went, not just why they left. The migration was not into oblivion. Current research and Pueblo oral history indicate a movement south and east, where these communities eventually reformed, their knowledge and traditions evolving into the vibrant Pueblo cultures of today. This transforms the narrative from one of a vanished people to a story of resilience and adaptation. The ongoing interpretation of tree rings and skeletal data is not just about pinpointing a cause of collapse, but about understanding a profound societal transformation. It asks us to consider whether the abandonment of Mesa Verde was a failure or a difficult, deliberate choice to seek a new beginning elsewhere, leaving their stunning stone cities as silent monuments to a necessary and enduring journey. The story of Mesa Verde is one of a community choosing a new path under immense pressure, a slow migration from a homeland, but some vanishings are not slow, nor are they a choice. They are sudden, absolute, and written into history as a single, catastrophic night. On the coast of the Gulf of Corinth in ancient Greece, the prosperous city-state of Helike was a powerful member of the Achaean League, known for its wealth, its maritime trade, and its sanctuary dedicated to Poseidon, the god of the sea and earthquakes. Then, in the winter of 373 before the Common Era, it was gone. Ancient historians like the geographer Pausanias recorded the event with awe. They described how, for 5 days before the disaster, small animals like mice and snakes fled the city in vast numbers, an eerie omen. Then, on a single terrifying night, a massive earthquake struck. The ground shook violently, and the city, along with every soul within it, was utterly obliterated. The accounts say it was not just destroyed, but swallowed. The sea rushed in over the ruins, and when the waters receded, Helike had vanished beneath the waves. For centuries, it was considered a legend, a moral tale from the ancient world about the wrath of the gods. The story was that Helike had angered Poseidon by refusing to give a sacred statue to a group of visitors, and the god's retribution was swift and total. Its exact location was lost, becoming a subject for poets and a warning for philosophers. The mystery for modern scholars, therefore, was not if it was destroyed. The ancient records were too consistent for that. The debate centered on the precise mechanics of the cataclysm. What natural forces could so completely erase a major city from the map in a matter of hours? One dominant theory, supported by the ancient texts, is a massive, shallow earthquake directly under the city, followed immediately by a tsunami. The quake would have liquefied the soft, waterlogged ground of the coastal plain, causing buildings to collapse instantly. Then, a wall of water from the Gulf would have surged inland, scouring the area and dragging the rubble out to sea or burying it under a thick layer of sediment. Other researchers propose a slightly different sequence, a phenomenon called co-seismic coastal subsidence. In this scenario, the earthquake itself caused a large block of land with the city on it to suddenly drop several meters below sea level. The sea would have then permanently flooded the sunken area, creating a new lagoon directly over the ruins. This would explain why the city was described as swallowed, not just smashed. The modern discovery in the late 20th century vindicated the ancient sources but deepened the scientific debate. Archaeologists, using core samples and ground-penetrating radar, finally located Helike not under the modern sea, but buried beneath layers of silt and gravel in a coastal plain several kilometers inland from the present shore. This finding was crucial. It showed that the coastline had changed dramatically since antiquity, likely due to repeated earthquakes and river deposits filling in the ancient Gulf. The ruins they found told a grim story. Walls collapsed in a single direction, consistent with a powerful seismic wave, and layers of marine shells mixed with rubble, evidence of a sudden incursion of seawater. The debate between a tsunami surge versus a permanent land subsidence continues in academic journals, a technical argument over the exact fingerprint of the disaster. But the legacy of Helike is larger than geology. Its dramatic, overnight disappearance became a powerful cultural parable, a real-world event that fed directly into the most enduring legend of a sunken city, a story that would captivate the world for millennia. Helike's fate, a city literally erased overnight, cemented a powerful idea in the human imagination, the concept of a great and advanced civilization lost beneath the waves. This idea found its ultimate expression in a story told by the philosopher Plato over 2,000 years ago, the Legend of Atlantis. It is crucial to understand from the start that Plato presented Atlantis not as history, but as a moral and political allegory. In his dialogues Timaeus and Critias, he describes a vast, powerful island nation beyond the Pillars of Hercules, blessed with immense wealth and advanced technology. He tells of its people becoming arrogant and corrupt, and of the gods punishing them by causing the island to sink into the ocean in a single day and night of misfortune. For Plato, this was a cautionary tale about the dangers of imperial pride and moral decay. Yet, despite its clear philosophical purpose, the story of Atlantis has ignited one of history's most enduring and contentious debates. Why do serious historians and archaeologists continue to search for a potential real-world inspiration behind the myth? The division is stark. On one side, most academics view Atlantis as a brilliant work of fiction, a plot device created by Plato to serve his philosophical arguments. They point out that no other ancient Greek writer before Plato mentions Atlantis, and that the described timeline of 9,000 years before his own era places it in a purely mythical past. For them, the search is a modern distraction. On the other side, a persistent line of inquiry argues that even the most fantastical stories often contain a kernel of truth, a distorted memory of a real historical event passed down through generations. This quest is not about finding Plato's literal island of bronze-clad warriors, but about identifying a catastrophic disappearance so profound it could have inspired such a lasting tale. Three primary theories dominate this search for Atlantis's potential seed. The first and most popular points back to the Minoan civilization and the Thera eruption. Proponents argue that the description of a sophisticated sea power suddenly destroyed by the sea aligns remarkably well with what we know of Minoan Crete. The tsunamis and ash fall could have been remembered for centuries and eventually woven into a grander, moralizing narrative by Plato, who may have heard Egyptian versions of the story. The second theory looks north to a lost landscape known as Doggerland. This was a vast, fertile plain that connected Great Britain to mainland Europe during the last ice age. As glaciers melted and sea levels rose, this land was gradually inundated over thousands of years. However, geological evidence suggests there may have been catastrophic flooding events, such as a massive tsunami from a submarine landslide off Norway around 6150 before the Common Era, that could have rapidly swallowed the final remnants of this populated land. Could vague memories of this lost world, passed down through oral traditions across millennia, have formed the basis for a story of a sunken land? The third theory focuses on a more historically proximate candidate, Tartessos. This was a wealthy, mysterious trading civilization located in the southwest of the Iberian Peninsula in modern-day Spain. Known to the ancient Greeks for its fabulous mineral wealth, Tartessos flourished and then vanished from historical records around the 6th century before the Common Era. Some researchers suggest it could have been destroyed by a natural disaster, perhaps an earthquake and tsunami similar to what befell Helike. Its location beyond the Strait of Gibraltar matches Plato's geographical clue of being outside the Pillars of Hercules. The debate, therefore, is not really about finding Atlantis itself, but about a fundamental question of how cultural memory works. Are these researchers chasing a phantom, or are they piecing together how real, traumatic collective experiences, like the sudden loss of a coastline or a brilliant culture, can be transformed over centuries into foundational myths? This search blurs the line between archaeology and legend, proving that sometimes the most powerful disappearances are those that live on forever in story, compelling us to look for the truth in the tide. The legend of a sunken continent speaks to a deep human fear of losing everything to the sea. But for another great power, the decline came not from a single cataclysm, but from a slow, quiet fading from the world stage. High in the mountains of northern Ethiopia, the Kingdom of Axum once stood as a titan of trade and faith. At its height, it was one of the four great empires of the ancient world, a contemporary and equal of Rome, Persia, and China. Its colossal stone stelae, some over 100 feet tall, still pierce the sky at its ancient capital, monuments to engineering and ambition. Axum controlled the lucrative trade routes between the Mediterranean and India, minting its own gold coins that bore the faces of its kings. It was here, in the early 4th century, that a king converted to Christianity, making Axum one of the very first Christian states on earth. This was not a civilization that collapsed overnight. Instead, after the 7th century, it began a long, gradual retreat from global prominence, shrinking from an international powerhouse to a more regional kingdom. The mystery of Axum is not where its people went. They are the ancestors of modern Ethiopians. The puzzle is why its political and economic influence waned so profoundly after centuries of success. Scholars are divided, piecing together a story of interconnected pressures that slowly tightened around the kingdom. One major line of inquiry points to the land itself. Axum's wealth was built on intensive agriculture, supporting a large population and a powerful army. Some researchers suggest centuries of farming and deforestation may have led to serious soil exhaustion and erosion, gradually undermining the agricultural surplus that fueled the state's expansion. This theory is intertwined with climate data suggesting a shift toward drier conditions in the region during this period, a slow environmental stress that could have made recovery difficult. A second powerful explanation looks beyond its borders to a tectonic shift in global commerce. The 7th century saw the rapid rise and expansion of the Islamic Caliphate across the Middle East and North Africa. This dramatically altered the world's trade networks. The old Red Sea routes, which Axum had dominated for centuries, became less central as new overland and Persian Gulf routes, controlled by Muslim powers, grew in importance. Axum found itself economically sidelined, cut off from the flow of wealth that had been its lifeblood. Could a single external event like this be enough to explain the decline, or was the kingdom already weakened from within? Another theory examines the costs of its own earlier success. Axum had expanded its territory significantly, and maintaining control over distant regions may have stretched its administrative and military resources thin, leaving it vulnerable when new challenges arose. The debate continues because the evidence allows for multiple interpretations. Did environmental strain make the kingdom fragile just as the geopolitical earthquake of Islam reshaped its world? Or was it a combination of all these factors, a perfect storm of slow-moving crises? The legacy of Axum is undeniable, living on in the enduring Christian traditions and monumental architecture of Ethiopia. But the precise reasons for its quiet retreat from global history remain a subject of quiet, scholarly contention, a reminder that even the mightiest empires can be gently unraveled by the slow turning of the earth and the changing currents of human commerce. The slow retreat of Axum from global trade maps finds a startling parallel in the dense jungles of Southeast Asia, where a city of stone gods was gradually reclaimed by the roots of the forest. Angkor, the magnificent capital of the Khmer Empire, represents one of history's most spectacular and puzzling abandonments. At its zenith, this was the largest pre-industrial city in the world, a sprawling metropolis centered on architectural wonders like Angkor Wat, a temple complex so vast it was designed as a model of the Hindu cosmos. For centuries, it was the beating heart of a powerful empire, sustained by an engineering marvel, a vast and intricate network of canals, reservoirs, and moats that captured monsoon rains and redistributed water for agriculture and daily life. Yet between the 14th and 15th centuries, this great capital was gradually, systematically abandoned. The royal court moved south, and the grand stone temples were left to the embrace of the jungle. The old narrative spoke simply of a collapse, a mysterious fall. Modern archaeology, however, reveals a far more complex and debated story of transformation. The central question is no longer why it fell, but why its people, in the end, chose to leave it behind. One of the most compelling theories points directly to the empire's greatest achievement, its water management system. Recent climate data suggests the region experienced severe volatility during Angkor's later centuries, swinging between intense multi-decade droughts and periods of exceptionally heavy monsoon rains. Both extremes would have been catastrophic for the delicate hydraulic network. A prolonged drought would have emptied the massive reservoirs, crippling rice production for a city of perhaps 1 million people. Conversely, extreme flooding could have breached canals and silted up the system, rendering it useless. The very infrastructure that enabled Angkor's rise may have become its fatal vulnerability in a changing climate, a theory that resonates deeply in our own time. A second major line of thought examines a profound spiritual revolution. The state religion of the Khmer Empire shifted from Hinduism and later Mahayana Buddhism, which emphasized the god-king, to the Theravada Buddhism. This newer form focused more on personal enlightenment and a less centralized monastic community. This religious shift fundamentally altered the political landscape. The king was no longer seen as a living god whose divine authority required the constant construction of massive stone temples. Without this ideological engine driving monumental projects and centralizing labor, the very purpose of the capital as a divine cosmic center may have diminished in the eyes of both the elite and the common people. The city's spiritual heart had moved on. Then there is the factor of external pressure. Historical records from neighboring kingdoms, particularly the rising power of Ayutthaya in what is now Thailand, speak of raids and conflicts on the Khmer frontier. While most scholars doubt Ayutthaya could have conquered Angkor outright in a single campaign, a sustained period of warfare, disrupting trade and straining resources, could have been the final stress that pushed a struggling system over the edge. The debate intensifies with every new technological revelation. LiDAR, a laser scanning technology that can see through the forest canopy, has been a game changer. It has revealed that Angkor was not just a ceremonial center with surrounding villages, but a vast, low-density urban sprawl covering an area comparable to modern Los Angeles, all intricately connected by roads and canals. This discovery makes the environmental theory even more potent. How could such an enormous population, utterly dependent on a man-made water grid, possibly withstand a century of climatic instability? Yet it also complicates the story, showing a level of urban planning and resilience that suggests the city endured challenges for a long time. So, was it a catastrophic failure of engineering, a quiet revolution in faith, or the relentless pressure of rivals? The truth likely lies in a fragile confluence of all three, where a changing climate weakened the body of the empire, a new spirituality changed its mind, and the sounds of conflict at the gates provided the final, decisive reason to seek a new beginning elsewhere, leaving a stone cosmos to sleep beneath the green. The quiet surrender of Angkor to the jungle is a story of environmental stress and spiritual change, but another island's silent statues tell a tale of isolation with a far starker outcome. On the most remote inhabited island on Earth, Rapa Nui, known to the world as Easter Island, a unique society flourished in profound solitude. For centuries, they carved and transported the iconic moe, those towering stone figures with their solemn, watchful faces, erecting them on massive ceremonial platforms called ahu. This was an astonishing cultural achievement, a testament to complex social organization and profound spiritual belief. Then, when European explorers finally reached its shores in the 18th century, they found a society in crisis, its population diminished and its grand traditions seemingly halted. The popular narrative, often repeated, is a stark parable of self-inflicted ecocide. The story goes that the islanders, in their zeal to move the massive moe, cut down every last palm tree for rollers and ropes, triggering catastrophic soil erosion, agricultural collapse, and ultimately, a brutal societal breakdown into warfare and hunger. This is a compelling, moralistic tale of a people who destroyed their own paradise. Yet, modern archaeological and historical research reveals a far more complex and hotly debated picture, one where scholars fiercely disagree on what weight to give each potential cause of collapse. The ecocide model, while powerful, is now seen by many as an oversimplification. Competing theories present a confluence of disasters. One critical factor was the accidental arrival of the Polynesian rat, which likely stowed away in the original settlers' canoes. With no natural predators, these rats would have consumed vast quantities of palm nuts, preventing the forests from regenerating long before the last tree was felled by human hands. This suggests the deforestation was a shared tragedy between species, not a deliberate act of environmental short-sightedness. Another major line of evidence points to the undeniable impact of European contact. While the island's society was likely already under strain by the 1700s, the arrival of outsiders was catastrophic. They brought devastating new illnesses for which the isolated population had no immunity, leading to catastrophic loss of life. Perhaps even more destructive was the brutal practice of slave raiding in the 1860s, which forcibly removed a huge portion of the remaining population, shattering social structures and erasing irreplaceable cultural knowledge in a single brutal stroke. Could internal conflict have been a primary driver? Archaeological surveys show that many of the great moai were deliberately toppled, often face down, which some interpret as evidence of violent uprising or warfare between clans, perhaps sparked by the mounting pressures of a changing environment. So, how do researchers weigh these causes? The debate hinges on interpreting the timeline and the scant evidence. Did the society essentially collapse before European arrival, making outsiders merely witnesses to a tragedy already complete? Or was it a resilient culture that was adapting to its changing island, only to be finally broken by the diseases and violence from beyond the horizon? The silent moai do not answer, but they stand as a profound case study. They force us to move beyond simple stories of blame and instead grapple with a fragile system struck by a cascade of misfortunes, where the true mystery is not if the society changed, but determining which shock, ecological, internal, or external, finally silenced the call to carve. The silent statues of Rapa Nui stand as a monument to a society transformed by forces both within and beyond its shores. Yet another disappearance, this one from the very frontiers of the Roman Empire, has fueled a legend just as persistent, born not from isolation but from imperial ambition. The story of the lost Ninth Legion, Legio Roman 9 Hispana, is a ghost story written in stone and ink. Around the year 120 Common Era, this battle-hardened unit of over 5,000 professional soldiers, veterans of campaigns across the empire, marched north from its fortress at York into the mists of what is now Scotland. According to popular legend, they were never seen again, swallowed whole by the wild, unconquered lands of the Picts. This image of a complete and mysterious annihilation has captured imaginations for centuries, inspiring novels and films. But what does the actual historical record say, and why does this military mystery still divide experts? The first step is separating stirring myth from sparse archaeology. The last verifiable record of the Ninth Legion in Britain is a stone inscription from York, dated to around 108 Common Era, mentioning its construction work there. After that, the trail goes cold in Britain. However, a military document from the Netherlands, dated to around 121 Common Era, suggests the legion, or at least a detachment of it, may have been present on the Rhine frontier around that time. Another fragmentary list from the mid-2nd century possibly places it in the east, so the legion did not simply blink out of existence in 120. The true debate is about what happened to it after it left Britain, and the theories form a historical detective story with clues scattered across the empire. The most dramatic theory, and the one that gave birth to the legend, is that the Ninth was annihilated in a massive, unrecorded uprising among the northern British tribes. Proponents point to archaeological evidence of warfare and the destruction of Roman forts in Scotland during this period. Could the entire legion have been lured into a treacherous ambush in the glens and wiped out, a disaster so embarrassing that Roman historians deliberately omitted it from official accounts? This theory satisfies the romantic notion of a clean, dramatic end, but it lacks a smoking gun. No mass grave of Roman military equipment has ever been found to confirm such a catastrophe. A second theory argues for a transfer and a later destruction. The Ninth may have been relocated to the Rhine frontier to help quell unrest there, and later sent even further east to participate in the brutal wars against the Parthian Empire, or to suppress the Bar Kokhba revolt in Judea. Legions were sometimes destroyed in these eastern conflicts, their names erased from the army lists in disgrace. If the Ninth met its end here, the records of its destruction could have been lost in the chaos of those distant campaigns. The third and least dramatic theory is one of simple administrative disbandment. the Roman army periodically reformed its legions. If the ninth was severely weakened by battle casualties or disease, it might have been formally dissolved, its remaining soldiers transferred to other units, and its proud number retired. This bureaucratic end offers no heroic last stand, but it is a common, documented fate for Roman military units. The heart of the debate lies in the frustrating lack of conclusive evidence anywhere. No definitive inscription records its honorable discharge or its tragic end. If it was destroyed in Britain, where is the evidence? If it fought and died in the East, why is its name not mentioned in the chronicles of those wars? This absence is what keeps the mystery alive. It is a puzzle where every piece of data, from a pottery shard in York to a broken tile in Germany, is scrutinized for meaning. The fate of the Ninth Legion is more than a military cold case. It is a reminder of the limits of imperial power and the fragile nature of historical memory, where 5,000 men and their eagle standard can step off the paved road of history and into the realm of enduring legend. Far from the solitary Moe and the vanished legions of Rome, a different kind of mystery unfolded on the banks of the Mississippi River. Here, centuries before European contact, a great city rose from the fertile floodplain. Cahokia, located just across from modern St. Louis, was the largest pre-Columbian settlement north of Mexico, a bustling, sophisticated urban center that at its peak around 1100 Common Era may have been home to 20,000 people. Its skyline was dominated by enormous earthen mounds, including the colossal Monk's Mound, a terraced pyramid that covered more ground than the Great Pyramid of Giza at its base. This was a place of grand plazas, intricate wood henges that tracked the sun, and a culture that connected vast regions through trade and ceremony. And then, by the mid-1300s, it was largely abandoned. The great plazas fell silent, and the mounds were left to the elements. Why would a thriving metropolis, the heart of a powerful society, simply empty out? The scale of the mystery is as immense as Monk's Mound itself, and the debate over its causes reveals how archaeologists read the subtle, silent language of the earth. Without written records, researchers must rely on environmental proxies and material clues, each open to interpretation. One prominent theory points to the very river that gave Cahokia life. The settlement was built on a floodplain, and evidence suggests a period of severe and repeated flooding in the 13th century. These weren't gentle overflows, but catastrophic events that could have submerged crops, ruined stored food, and made entire neighborhoods uninhabitable. How many seasons of lost harvests can a city of 20,000 withstand before people decide to move? Linked to this is the question of resources. To build their monumental mounds and sustain a huge population, the Cahokians would have needed vast amounts of wood for construction and fuel. Some studies suggest that deforestation of the surrounding bluffs may have led to increased runoff and erosion, ironically making the flooding problems they faced even worse. It is a potential cycle of their own success leading to environmental stress. Other scholars look to broader climatic shifts. The timeline of Cahokia's decline coincides with the beginning of what is called the Little Ice Age, a period of cooler temperatures and altered weather patterns across the northern hemisphere. While not an ice age in the glacial sense, this shift could have shortened growing seasons or changed rainfall patterns, stressing the agricultural system that fed the city. A cooler, less predictable climate might have made the concentrated, urban way of life at Cahokia increasingly risky and unsustainable. Could a changing sky have been the ultimate reason for the dispersal? Then there are the social explanations. A city of that size and complexity would have required strong, centralized leadership and a degree of social harmony. Some archaeologists point to signs of increased fortification in Cahokia's later phases, like a newly built stockade wall. This could indicate rising social tension, perhaps conflict between elites and commoners or pressure from outside groups. Did internal unrest sparked by the hardships of flood or famine fracture the social contract that held the city together? Another haunting possibility is the introduction of new illnesses. While often associated with later European contact, trade networks spanning North America could have inadvertently transmitted pathogens from other regions, causing outbreaks that a dense urban population was ill-equipped to handle. The truth is that no single clue provides a definitive answer. The archaeological record presents a mosaic of challenges, flooding layers, pollen samples showing changing forests, and skeletal remains that hint at periods of poor nutrition or illness. The great debate is about weighting these pieces. Was it primarily an environmental catastrophe, a social unraveling, or a slow convergence of all these pressures? Cahokia's story is not one of a people vanishing from the earth, but of a grand experiment in urban living that ultimately changed form. The descendants of the Mississippian culture likely dispersed into smaller communities, their knowledge and traditions flowing into other streams of Native American life. The silent mounds today ask us to consider the delicate balance between a society's ambition and the enduring demands of the land it calls home, a lesson written not in stone but in soil. The silent mounds of Cahokia speak to a society's struggle with its environment, a theme that reaches its most chilling conclusion on the icy shores of Greenland. Here, Norse settlers from Iceland established two vibrant communities, the eastern and western settlements, around the year 985 Common Era. For nearly 500 years, these Scandinavian outposts clung to life at the edge of the known world, raising cattle, building stone churches, and trading walrus ivory with Europe. Then, in the late 15th century, a ship arriving from Iceland found only abandoned farmsteads. The last Norse Greenlander was gone. This was not a sudden catastrophe, but a slow, grinding fade to silence, and its cause remains one of history's most hotly debated failures. The central question is stark. Why did a society that endured for centuries ultimately vanish, while the Inuit people, living in the same environment, not only survived but thrived? The evidence paints a picture of a community caught in a tightening vise, and historians fiercely debate which jaw of the vise closed the tightest. One dominant line of explanation points squarely at the sky. The Norse arrival coincided with a period known as the medieval warm period, when temperatures were relatively mild, allowing for pasture-based farming similar to their Icelandic homeland. But by the 1300s, the climate began to shift into what we call the Little Ice Age. Summers grew shorter and cooler, winters longer and more severe. This meant shorter growing seasons for grass to feed their livestock, more sea ice blocking crucial trade routes and sealing off harbors, and a general encroachment of hardship. Proponents of this climate determinism argue that no society, especially one practicing European-style agriculture at its climatic limit, could withstand such a profound environmental shift. The land itself became hostile to their way of life, yet other scholars push back against this as an oversimplification. They point to the Inuit, who successfully adapted to the very same cooling climate using a flexible maritime hunting culture, harvesting seals, whales, and fish. This comparison raises a profound question. Was it the changing climate that doomed the Norse, or was it their own cultural and economic choices? This is where theories of social failure come into sharp focus. The Norse Greenlanders were deeply conservative, clinging to a Scandinavian identity. Their economy and status were tied to cattle farming and the export of luxury goods like walrus ivory to Europe. As the climate cooled, they doubled down on their failing pastoral model, even as their cattle grew undernourished and their pastures eroded. There is little archaeological evidence they adopted the superior Inuit technologies, like toggle harpoons for hunting ringed seals or skin kayaks for navigating icy waters. Did a sense of cultural superiority, a belief in their own civilized ways, prevent them from learning from their neighbors? this cultural rigidity may have been compounded by economic isolation. As sea ice increased, trade with Norway and Iceland became more dangerous and less frequent. The market for walrus ivory also declined as elephant ivory became more available to Europe. This cut off their source of iron, timber, and other essentials, as well as their cultural lifeline to the broader Norse world. They were slowly marooned both physically and economically. The question of conflict with the Inuit, known to the Norse as Skraelings, is another contentious point. The sagas mention both trade and clashes. Some researchers suggest that as resources dwindled, competition turned violent, and the increasingly vulnerable Norse settlements may have faced raids they could not withstand. Others find scant archaeological evidence for widespread warfare, suggesting the two groups largely avoided each other. The debate, therefore, is a weighing of factors. Was it primarily the external shock of climate change, an unavoidable environmental endgame, or was it a tragic failure of adaptation, where social conservatism, economic vulnerability, and perhaps conflict created a perfect storm? The haunting lesson of the Greenland Norse is not just about a changing climate, but about the peril of inflexibility in a changing world. Their empty farmsteads stand as a silent testament to the fact that sometimes survival is not about who is strongest, but who is most willing to change. The frozen silence of Greenland's abandoned farms gives way to an older, more fiery mystery on the fertile plains of Eastern Europe. Long before the pyramids rose in Egypt, a Neolithic culture known as Cucuteni Tripilia was building something astonishing, massive settlements that were among the largest in the world at the time. From around 5,500 to 3,500 before the Common Era, their communities sprawled across what is now Romania, Moldova, and Ukraine. Some of these proto-cities housed up to 20,000 people, a staggering concentration for a Stone Age society. They were master potters, creating exquisite vessels painted with intricate spiral motifs, and they lived in large, two-story houses arranged in concentric circles. But their most baffling practice was not how they lived, but how they chose to leave. Archaeologists have uncovered a stunning pattern. Every 60 to 80 years, the inhabitants would deliberately set their entire village ablaze. They would remove valuable items and then burn every structure to the ground in a great, controlled conflagration. After the ashes cooled, they would rebuild their community almost exactly on the same spot, layer upon ritual layer. Then, around 3,500 before the Common Era, this cycle of fiery renewal stopped. The culture itself faded from the archaeological record, its people disappearing into the mists of prehistory. Why would a society practice such a dramatic, costly ritual, and what finally caused their way of life to end? The theories are as layered as the ash in their settlements. One compelling explanation looks to the sky and the soil. A shift to a cooler, drier climate during this period could have stressed their agricultural system, which relied on fertile loess soil. If crop yields began to fail consistently, the enormous populations in those mega settlements would have become unsustainable, forcing a dispersal into smaller, more mobile groups. This environmental pressure theory suggests the final burning was simply never followed by a rebuild, as people moved on for good. Another line of thought examines the consequences of their own success. These were not nomadic hunters, they were settled farmers living at unprecedented densities. Some researchers argue that over centuries, the local resources, particularly wood for building and fuel, or game in the surrounding forests, may have been depleted. The very act of rebuilding entire villages every few generations would have been an enormous drain on the environment. Could the Cucuteni Tripilia culture have, in a sense, consumed its own foundation? The most famous and contentious theory, however, involves newcomers on the horizon. This is the Kurgan hypothesis, which proposes that waves of pastoralists from the Pontic-Caspian steppe, known as the Yamnaya culture, moved into the region. These were horseback riders, likely speaking a Proto-Indo-European language with different social structures and technologies. Did they arrive as conquerors, overwhelming the settled farmers in conflict? Or was it a slower process of cultural infiltration and assimilation, where the old ways gradually blended and transformed into something new? The archaeological evidence here is hotly debated, with some scholars finding signs of abrupt change and others seeing a more gradual transition. But the heart of the mystery may lie in that very ritual of the burn. Why do it at all? This practice divides interpretation at the most fundamental level. Some archaeologists see it as a profound spiritual act, a ceremonial purification of the community, a symbolic death and rebirth that cleansed social tensions or honored cosmic cycles. Others propose a practical reason, that burning the wattle and daub structures killed pests like insects and rodents, sanitizing the site for the next generation. Could it have been both, a functional act wrapped in sacred meaning? The disappearance of the Cucuteni Tripilia culture forces us to consider a society that mastered large-scale communal living 4,000 years before Rome, yet chose to ritually destroy its own handiwork on a schedule. Their end asks whether they were ultimately undone by a changing world, by the footsteps of strangers, or by the internal logic of their own fiery traditions, a logic we may never fully comprehend. The fiery, cyclical end of the Cucuteni Tripilia villages speaks to a ritual understanding of renewal, a belief that from ashes new life must grow. But in the jungles of Central America, another great civilization faced an ending with no clear rebirth in sight. The story of the Maya is often framed as a singular, mysterious collapse, but this is a profound oversimplification. Maya culture is very much alive today, with millions of speakers of Mayan languages. The true enigma is the specific disappearance of the great classic period city-states in the southern lowlands, places like the towering Tikal and the powerful Kingdom of Axum. Around the 9th century Common Era, these bustling political and ceremonial centers which had thrived for centuries were systematically abandoned. The stone stelae which had recorded the deeds of kings in intricate hieroglyphs stopped being carved, the grand plazas fell silent, and the jungle began its slow, patient work of reclaiming pyramids and palaces. This was not the end of the Maya people, but the dramatic end of a particular political and urban way of life in that region. Unraveling why these powerful cities emptied has become one of archaeology's most complex debates, a case where evidence points in multiple, contradictory directions, and scholars fiercely disagree on what shattered the system first. The debate centers on a web of interconnected pressures, each supported by compelling data, making it nearly impossible to isolate a single culprit. One of the most powerful lines of evidence comes not from the ruins but from deep within caves. Scientists study stalagmites, those stone pillars that grow from cave floors, as they contain precise chemical records of past rainfall. Data from caves across the Yucatán Peninsula reveals a devastating pattern, a series of severe, multi-decade droughts that struck right at the time of the classic city's decline. These were not mere dry spells, but prolonged periods where life-giving rains failed, season after season. In a region where survival depended on carefully managed rainwater collected in reservoirs, such a climatic shift would have been catastrophic. A failed rainy season means empty reservoirs, failed maize crops, and ultimately, famine for a dense urban population. Proponents of the climate theory argue that no political system, no matter how robust, could withstand such a direct and sustained assault from the sky. Yet, other researchers point to the clear signs of human conflict etched into the stone cities themselves. The later classic period was an era of intense, endemic warfare. City-states like Tikal and Calakmul were locked in a bitter rivalry for dominance, engaging in campaigns that were less about territory and more about capturing rival nobles for ritual purposes. Hieroglyphic texts boast of these captures and the subsequent ceremonies. This constant state of conflict drained resources, destabilized trade networks, and likely created a climate of fear and insecurity. Some cities show evidence of hastily built fortifications in their final phases. Could this escalating warfare have so weakened the social fabric that when the droughts did arrive, the cities had no resilience left? Or was the warfare itself a symptom of a deeper crisis, as kingdoms fought desperately over dwindling resources? This leads to another pillar of the debate, the question of sustainability. These cities were triumphs of human ingenuity, supporting large populations in a tropical environment. But that success may have sown the seeds of its own undoing. Some archaeologists point to signs of severe environmental degradation, deforestation to clear land for agriculture and to produce lime plaster for their monuments, which could have led to soil erosion and local climate changes. Combined with a growing population, the land itself may have been pushed beyond its capacity to provide. Furthermore, the very political structure, centered on a divine king who was responsible for ensuring prosperity and rain, may have become a fatal vulnerability. When the rains failed despite the king's rituals and ceremonies, the fundamental contract between ruler and ruled would have broken. The king's divine authority would evaporate as quickly as the water in the reservoirs, leading to political upheaval, rebellion, and a loss of faith in the entire system. The heart of the scholarly divide lies in sequencing these causes. Was it a top-down collapse where drought triggered famine, which led to the failure of the king's legitimacy, sparking warfare and abandonment? Or was it a bottom-up collapse where centuries of environmental strain and overpopulation created a fragile society that then shattered under the stress of drought and war? There is no consensus, only a mosaic of theories. Some see the abandonment not as a rapid catastrophe, but as a managed retreat where people gradually dispersed from the unsustainable urban centers to smaller, more sustainable communities elsewhere, a strategic adaptation rather than a defeat. The silent cities of the classic Maya lowlands stand as a monumental lesson in complexity, a warning that the fall of a civilization is rarely due to one single blow, but often a confluence of misfortunes where a changing climate, human conflict, and the limits of the land conspire to close a grand chapter in history. The intricate web of drought and war that unraveled the Maya cities speaks to a civilization undone by forces both environmental and human. But sometimes, a disappearance is recorded not in silent ruins, but in a single, vivid story passed down through the ages. The historian Herodotus, writing in the 5th century before the Common Era, tells a tale of almost biblical scale. He recounts that the Persian king Cambyses II, son of the great Cyrus, sent a mighty army of 50,000 men from the city of Thebes across the desert. Their mission was to conquer the remote and sacred oracle of Ammon at the Siwa oasis, a place of immense spiritual power that had dared to defy the king. Herodotus describes a journey into nightmare. The vast army marched for days, but then a monstrous sandstorm, a Khamsin, rose from the south with a fury like nothing they had ever seen. The sky turned dark, the wind screamed, and the desert itself seemed to come alive. When the storm finally passed, the entire army had vanished, buried beneath a shifting sea of sand without a single survivor to tell the tale. It is a story of hubris and divine punishment, a legendary end for an army that dared to challenge a god. For centuries, this account was read as pure Herodotian drama, a moral fable woven into his histories. The sheer scale of the loss, the complete lack of any physical trace, and the convenient narrative of a proud king's downfall led most scholars to classify it as fiction, a colorful story from a writer known for blending fact with folklore. Yet the haunting image of 50,000 soldiers and their equipment swallowed whole by the desert has proven irresistible. It raises a tantalizing question: could a story this specific, even if embellished, be rooted in a real and catastrophic event? This question divides historians and archaeologists into two distinct camps, a division that turns on how we read ancient texts and what we expect the desert to preserve. On one side are the skeptics who point to the logistical improbability. Moving an army of that size across hundreds of miles of the western desert, known as the Great Sand Sea, would have been a staggering feat of supply and navigation, even for the organized Persians. There is no mention of such a catastrophic loss in Persian records, which you would expect for a disaster of that magnitude. Furthermore, Herodotus is our only source, and he wrote decades after the alleged event, relying on Egyptian priests for his information. For these scholars, the lost army is a powerful myth, perhaps inspired by smaller, real-life disappearances of caravans or patrols, magnified over time into an epic tale. On the other side are the researchers who argue that we should not dismiss the possibility outright. They note that Herodotus, while sometimes fanciful, has been proven correct on many geographical and cultural details. The Siwa oasis was a real and significant religious center, and Cambyses did campaign in Egypt. Is it so hard to believe he might have sent a force to subdue a rebellious oracle? The desert, they argue, is a perfect preserver. If a sudden, catastrophic sandstorm did engulf a column on the move, it could have buried everything from bronze helmets to iron weapons in an instant, creating a time capsule of immense archaeological value. This belief has fueled modern expeditions, most notably by geologists and archaeologists using ground-penetrating radar and satellite imagery. They have searched likely routes, looking for anomalies, for the faint signature of metal or disturbed earth beneath the dunes. Some have reported finding scattered pottery shards or old wells, but nothing that constitutes an army's final resting place. The desert guards its secrets well. The enduring mystery, therefore, is not just about sand and soldiers. It is a debate about the boundary between history and legend. Are we chasing a phantom, a story that was never meant to be read as literal truth? Or is there a chance that beneath some lonely dune in the Great Sand Sea lies one of the most dramatic mass disappearances in military history, waiting silently for a shift in the wind to reveal its truth? The search itself becomes part of the story, a testament to our enduring need to find proof for the tales that haunt our imagination. The desert sands that may hide an army also guard the secrets of a different kind of power, one built not on conquest but on commerce and stone. Far to the south, on a plateau in southeastern Africa, the silent ruins of Great Zimbabwe stand as a monumental rebuke to a painful history of misinterpretation. This was no outpost of a foreign empire, but the thriving capital of a wealthy and sophisticated African kingdom, a hub of trade that connected the interior goldfields to ports on the Indian Ocean. Its most iconic feature, the Great Enclosure, is a breathtaking structure of precisely cut granite blocks, assembled without mortar into walls that curve gracefully and tower over 30 feet high. For centuries, this city was the heart of a vast network, its wealth flowing from gold, ivory, and cattle. Yet, by the 15th century, its royal precincts were largely empty. The capital's political and economic power had moved elsewhere, leaving the stone city to the elements. The first and most damaging mystery surrounding Great Zimbabwe was not its abandonment, but a deliberate theft of its history. For generations, colonial-era scholars refused to believe that an African civilization could produce such an architectural marvel. They concocted fanciful theories, attributing its construction to Phoenicians, Arabs, or even the biblical Queen of Sheba. These racist narratives were not just incorrect, they were an active effort to deny the region's profound historical legacy and justify colonial control. Modern archaeology has utterly dismantled these myths, firmly establishing Great Zimbabwe as the product of the Shona people, a center of indigenous political power and artistic achievement. With its true origins affirmed, the real historical debate begins. Why did the rulers leave this magnificent stone capital behind? Scholars now focus on a confluence of internal and external pressures, but disagree on which factor was the decisive blow. One prominent theory examines the kingdom's economic foundation, gold. The plateau region was rich in gold deposits, which were mined and traded for centuries. It is possible that the most accessible veins were eventually exhausted, or that the technical challenges of digging deeper mines became too great. If the flow of gold, the primary source of the elite's wealth and prestige, began to dwindle, the economic engine of the capital would have sputtered. Linked to this is the question of the land itself. A concentrated population supported by agriculture and livestock may have gradually depleted the local soils and overgrazed the pastures, creating an environmental strain that made sustaining a large royal court increasingly difficult. Another line of thought points to political dynamics. The Kingdom of Zimbabwe was not a monolithic empire, but likely a constellation of chiefdoms under a paramount ruler. Over time, rival factions or subordinate rulers in other regions may have grown in power and wealth, challenging the central authority of the great Zimbabwe capital. This could have led to political fragmentation, where the kingdom effectively split into smaller, competing polities, rendering the old capital obsolete. The ruler may have simply relocated to a new center of power to better control a restive territory or to be closer to emerging allies. Then there is the powerful pull of changing trade routes. The kingdom's wealth depended on its position as a middleman, funneling interior goods to coastal ports like Sofala. As Portuguese and Swahili traders established more direct contacts along the coast and perhaps even further inland, the centralized control exerted from Great Zimbabwe may have been bypassed. If the trade networks shifted, the strategic reason for the capital's location vanished. The elite would have had a powerful incentive to move closer to the new centers of commerce, perhaps founding successor states like the Mutapa Kingdom to the north. The mystery lies in the precise combination and timing of these factors. Did environmental pressure slowly erode the capital's viability, prompting a planned political migration? Or was it a rapid decision driven by a sudden shift in economic opportunity, leaving the stone walls as a magnificent but empty shell? The ruins themselves offer clues but no verdict, evidence of reduced construction in the final phases, and a gradual departure rather than a violent end. Great Zimbabwe's abandonment is not a story of collapse, but of transformation, a conscious shift in the seat of power. Its enduring legacy is twofold: a masterpiece of African architecture that silenced racist lies, and a complex puzzle of a society that outgrew its own stone crown, choosing to write its next chapter on a different page of the landscape. The stone walls of Great Zimbabwe represent a deliberate departure, a society moving its center of power, but some disappearances leave no ruins to study, only a signature in stone tools scattered across a continent. Around 13,000 years ago, a distinct culture emerged across North America, defined by a single, brilliant innovation, the Clovis point. These were not just spear tips, they were masterpieces of flint-knapping, slender, leaf-shaped projectiles with a distinctive groove or flute running up the base, designed to be hafted securely onto a spear shaft. For centuries, these hunters and their iconic technology spread rapidly, their sites found from coast to coast. They are widely considered the first clearly defined archaeological culture in the Americas. And then, quite abruptly in the archaeological record, their signature vanishes. Around 12,800 years ago, the Clovis culture disappears, along with the magnificent megafauna they are thought to have hunted, creatures like mammoths, mastodons, and giant ground sloths. This dual vanishing act of a people and their prey is one of prehistory's most profound puzzles, and it has ignited a debate that cuts to the very core of how we understand ancient cataclysm. The central question is stark: What could cause such a widespread and successful culture to fade from the scene at the same moment so many large animal species went extinct? The answer divides experts into two passionate and deeply opposed camps, representing a fundamental philosophical split in archaeology between gradualist explanations and catastrophic ones. The traditional and still mainstream explanation is a story of human ingenuity meeting ecological limits. This is the overkill hypothesis. It suggests that as highly efficient Clovis hunters spread across a continent where massive animals had never encountered such a clever predator, they hunted these megafauna to extinction. The loss of their primary food source, the theory goes, then forced the Clovis people to adapt rapidly, splintering into new groups with new technologies better suited for hunting smaller game and gathering plants. In this view, the disappearance of the Clovis point is not a sign of societal collapse, but of cultural evolution and diversification. A related gradualist theory points to natural climate change. The end of the last ice age was not a smooth warming trend. It was punctuated by a sudden, mysterious return to cold conditions known as the Younger Dryas period, which began right around 12,800 years ago. This 1,000-year cold snap, with its drier, more variable conditions, could have placed immense stress on both the large animals and the human communities that relied on them, leading to a cultural transformation. The opposing camp proposes an explanation of almost unimaginable drama, the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. This controversial theory argues that the cause was not on the ground but from the sky. Proponents suggest that a comet or asteroid fragmented in the atmosphere, unleashing a series of powerful airbursts over North America, like cosmic bombs detonating above the ice sheets. The immediate effects would have been apocalyptic, generating continent-wide wildfires, followed by a soot-darkened sky that triggered rapid global cooling, the very Younger Dryas freeze. This single catastrophic day, they argue, explains everything: the extinction of the megafauna unable to survive the sudden climate shift and loss of habitat, and the collapse of the Clovis culture, whose social networks and hunting traditions were shattered in the aftermath. They point to a thin, dark layer of sediment at archaeological sites from this exact time, containing microscopic diamonds, unusual soot, and other materials they argue are the fingerprints of an extraterrestrial impact. The debate between these two models is exceptionally heated because it is about more than stone tools and mammoth bones. It is about methodology and worldview. Mainstream archaeologists critique the impact hypothesis, arguing the evidence is misinterpreted, that the black layer can be explained by more ordinary processes like wildfires, and that no crater of the required size and age has been conclusively found. They see the overkill or climate models as more parsimonious, grounded in observable human behavior and known climatic shifts. For impact proponents, the mainstream view is too conservative, unwilling to accept that Earth's history can be rewritten in a single catastrophic day. They see the convergence of evidence, from nano-diamonds to the sudden disappearance of a culture, as too coincidental to ignore. This standoff over the Clovis silence is a perfect microcosm of a great divide in studying the past. Do cultures and species primarily change through slow, adaptive pressures, or can their trajectories be irrevocably altered in a moment of cosmic bad luck? The scattered Clovis points are silent on the matter, but they lie at the heart of a battle over the very nature of history itself. A debate over whether the story of life on Earth is one of gradual evolution or punctuated by terrible star-born disaster. The debate over a sky-born cataclysm and the Clovis culture is a battle of timelines between slow adaptation and sudden, world-ending fire. Yet another disappearance from the ancient world presents a mystery of a different scale, one of human movement and chaos written in the ashes of empires. Around 1200 before the Common Era, the civilized world of the Eastern Mediterranean and Near East shuddered and fell. The Hittite Empire in Anatolia vanished. The mighty new kingdom of Egypt was brought to its knees, barely surviving. Mycenaean Greece collapsed into a dark age. Great trading cities like Ugarit were burned and never rebuilt. In the records of those who survived, particularly the Egyptians, a common and terrifying culprit is named the Sea Peoples. These were not a single nation, but a confederation of mysterious marauders who arrived from the sea in ships, attacking coastlines with a ferocity that toppled kingdoms. Pharaoh Ramesses III immortalized his victory over them at the Battle of the Delta, with vivid temple reliefs showing chaotic naval combat against warriors with feathered helmets. But who were they, and where did they go after their wave of destruction broke? This question has divided historians for over a century, because the Sea Peoples left no kingdoms, no capital cities, and no inscriptions of their own. They exist only in the records of their victims as spectral agents of collapse. The core of the mystery is their origin and their ultimate fate. Were they a cause of the Great Bronze Age collapse or a symptom of it, desperate refugees turned into ruthless invaders? The theories are as varied as the cultures they supposedly destroyed. One major line of thought places their origins in the shattered world of the Aegean. As the Mycenaean palace culture fell, perhaps due to drought, earthquake, or internal strife, displaced populations, including groups the Egyptians called the Peliset and the Denyen, took to the sea. They became pirates and migrants searching for new lands, their violence fueled by desperation. Other researchers look north to the coasts of Anatolia and the Balkans, suggesting the Sea Peoples were a mix of ethnic groups from modern-day Turkey and southern Europe, uprooted by the same systemic failures that weakened the Hittites. They may have been a domino effect in human form, pushed from their homes by famine or conflict, only to push into the lands of others with devastating force. The most enduring theory about their fate connects them directly to a famous biblical people. Egyptian records state that after their defeat, some of the Sea Peoples, specifically the Peliset, were settled in fortresses along the southern coast of Canaan. This region later became known as Philistia, home to the Philistines, the famed adversaries of the Israelites. Archaeological finds in early Philistine cities show a distinct material culture with Aegean-style pottery and cooking practices, a strong clue that these settlers were indeed a group of Sea Peoples who traded their oars for plows and became a permanent part of the Levantine landscape. Other groups may have been absorbed by the societies they attacked, or sailed on to settle in places like Sardinia or Sicily, their identities slowly blending into the local populations. The reason this remains one of history's great puzzles is the utter lack of a homeland. Without a source to excavate, without their own version of events, the Sea Peoples are defined entirely by the chaos they caused. Were they barbarian hordes or climate refugees? Were they the spark that lit the fire, or simply the most visible flame in a world already burning? The reliefs at Medinet Habu show them defeated, but their true story, lost to the very waves they crossed, continues to divide those who seek to understand the end of the first great age of empires. The Sea Peoples vanished into the very history they helped shatter, leaving only their name in the records of their enemies. But some lost places live on not in the chronicles of kings, but in the fireside tales of traders and the sacred verses of scripture. Deep in the sands of the Arabian Peninsula lies a legend of a city so magnificent and so proud that it was erased from the earth as divine punishment. The Quran speaks of Aram of the Pillars, a city of towering architecture built by a people called the Ad, who were destroyed for their arrogance. This same city, cloaked in the same aura of fabulous wealth and sudden doom, appears in the Arabian Nights as a phantom metropolis of countless columns, lost in the trackless desert. For centuries, Aram was a poetic mirage, a moral lesson spun from sand and story. Then, in the late 20th century, a quest began to find its historical shadow, a place known to ancient geographers as Ubar, the fabled hub of the frankincense trade. This search would become a modern detective story, blending space-age technology with age-old myth, and its startling conclusion would ignite a fierce debate that continues to this day. The key to the search was not a map but a trade route. Frankincense, the precious aromatic resin burned in temples across the ancient world, was worth its weight in gold. It could only be harvested from scraggly trees in southern Arabia, specifically in the region of Dhofar in modern-day Oman. From there, caravans had to cross the brutal, empty quarter of the Arabian desert, the Rub al-Khali, to reach markets in Mesopotamia and the Mediterranean. Logic dictated that somewhere along this perilous route, a major trading city must have existed to provision these caravans and control the flow of wealth. This was the hypothesized Ubar. The breakthrough came from an eye in the sky. Archaeologists working with space shuttle radar imagery identified faint, ancient caravan tracks converging on a remote spot in southern Oman. These tracks, invisible on the ground but clear from orbit, led to a site near the modern settlement of Shisr. Expeditions to the location revealed the ruins of a fortress, with walls and towers emerging from the sand. The most dramatic find was a massive sinkhole into which a significant portion of the structure had collapsed. The discovery was immediately hailed as a triumph, the legendary Ubar, and perhaps even the historical kernel of Iram found at last. The announcement captured the world's imagination, a perfect fusion of high-tech discovery and ancient mystery. Yet almost as soon as the dust settled, scholarly dissent began. The division was fundamental. Was this the grand, mythical city or something far more ordinary? One camp, led by the discoverers, argued this was indeed a major center. They pointed to its strategic location at the convergence of caravan routes, the evidence of long-term occupation, and the import of goods from across the ancient world. The catastrophic collapse into a sinkhole, they suggested, perfectly mirrored the legendary destruction of a city swallowed by the sands as divine retribution. The story wrote itself. Ubar's wealth was built on the unstable ground of a limestone cavern, and when the roof finally gave way, taking the city's vital water source with it, the desert reclaimed its remains. This narrative was powerfully compelling. The opposing view, held by many mainstream archaeologists, urged caution. They examined the exposed ruins and saw not a sprawling metropolis of legend, but a modest fortification, likely a fortified well station or caravanserai. It was an important waypoint, to be sure, a crucial stop on the incense road, but not a capital city of immense wealth and power. The scale of the architecture simply did not match the epic descriptions. For these scholars, labeling it as the fabled Ubar or Iram was an overreach, a case of letting a powerful myth inflate the interpretation of a significant, but not extraordinary, archaeological site. The sinkhole, while dramatic, was a local geological event, not necessarily the cause of a civilization's disappearance. The debate, therefore, is not just about stones in the desert. It is about what we want a discovery to mean. Does finding any ancient structure in the correct general area validate a millennia-old story? Or does the myth speak to a broader truth about the rise and fall of desert trade empires, with this fort representing just one node in a vast, invisible network? The silent stones of Shisr cannot tell us if they were once called Iram, but they stand as a testament to the very real world of the frankincense trade and to the human desire to pin our most enduring legends to a place we can finally point to on a map, even if the map itself is still being drawn. The legend of Iram pinned to a desert fort shows how a myth can cling to a place, but another civilization, equally shrouded in legend, vanished from the very edge of the ancient world, leaving behind a name whispered by Greek historians and a puzzle buried in Spanish marshland. Tartessos was a name that conjured images of fabulous wealth, a kingdom of silver and tin located somewhere beyond the Pillars of Hercules in the southwestern corner of the Iberian Peninsula. Greek sources like the historian Herodotus spoke of it as a distant, almost mythical land of plenty, ruled by the wise King Arganthonios, who was said to have lived for 120 years. For centuries, Tartessos was a golden rumor, a semi-legendary trading partner for the Phoenicians who established colonies along the coast. Then, around 500 before the Common Era, the references to this wealthy kingdom cease. Tartessos disappears from the historical record as completely as if it had sunk into the Atlantic. The search for its reality and the reason for its end is a journey into a landscape where history and myth are impossible to untangle, and every theory is built on fragments. The first challenge is finding Tartessos at all. Unlike the stone cities of Greece or the pyramids of Egypt, Tartessian remains are elusive and enigmatic. Archaeologists have not uncovered a grand capital city with clear inscriptions bearing its name. Instead, the evidence is subtle, a scattering of rich finds. Spectacular gold and silver hoards, like the breathtaking Carambolo treasure with its intricate jewelry, have been unearthed in the region. These artifacts show a sophisticated local culture with strong influences from both Phoenician traders and indigenous Iberian traditions. Sites like Cancho Rono reveal large, ceremonial structures that suggest a complex hierarchical society. Yet, without a definitive political center, Tartessos remains a civilization defined more by its cultural footprint and its legendary reputation than by its excavated palaces. This lack of a clear, monumental heart is what makes its disappearance so difficult to explain. Did a kingdom vanish, or did a cultural identity simply transform under pressure? The debate over its fate centers on three compelling possibilities, each pointing to a different kind of ending. One theory reaches for a cataclysm straight out of the Atlantis playbook. The southwestern coast of Iberia is a seismically active zone. Some researchers propose that a massive earthquake, followed by a devastating tsunami, could have obliterated the main Tartessian ports and settlements, which were likely situated in the fertile, low-lying estuaries of the Guadalquivir River. Such an event would have been sudden and total, erasing the physical centers of power and trade in a single terrible day. This natural disaster theory is powerfully seductive because it mirrors the legendary fate of other lost civilizations, providing a clean, dramatic answer that resonates with the sense of a kingdom being wiped from the map. It transforms the Greek stories into a distant memory of a real geological trauma. A second, more historically grounded explanation looks to the ambitions of a rising rival. During the 6th century before the Common Era, the Phoenician colony of Carthage in North Africa was growing into a Mediterranean superpower. As Carthage expanded its influence, it sought to control the lucrative metal trade of Iberia directly. Could the Carthaginians have conquered or systematically dismantled the Tartessian network to eliminate a middleman? Some ancient sources hint at conflicts in the region. If Tartessos was a wealthy but perhaps less militarized trading partner, it may have been unable to withstand the organized force of Carthaginian expansion. This theory frames the disappearance as an act of economic and political conquest, where an independent kingdom was absorbed or destroyed by a more aggressive imperial power. The third theory is slower, quieter, and in some ways the most intriguing. It focuses on the very landscape that gave Tartessos its wealth. The civilization was built on river trade, using the Guadalquivir and Guadiana rivers as highways to the interior mining regions. Over time, these rivers are known to have silted up significantly, a process of natural sedimentation that would have gradually choked the vital ports, making them inaccessible to seagoing ships. If the rivers became unnavigable, the entire economic foundation of Tartessos would have crumbled. The trade routes would have shifted, the wealth would have dried up, and the population would have likely dispersed inland, abandoning the coastal centers. This environmental explanation suggests not a dramatic collapse but a slow fading, a civilization gently suffocated by the very land that nurtured it. Its people did not vanish, they simply moved on, and their distinct cultural identity blended into that of their neighbors over generations. The enduring mystery of Tartessos lies in this profound blurriness. Was it a centralized kingdom that met a violent end, or a loose confederation of wealthy chiefdoms that dissolved when its economic reason for being evaporated? The debate is fueled by the scant evidence, which allows each researcher to see a different pattern in the same few precious stones and pieces of gold. Tartessos stands at the crossroads of archaeology and poetry, a reminder that some civilizations leave behind not ruins, but legends, and that sometimes the most compelling mysteries are those where we cannot be sure if we are searching for a lost city or the ghost of a golden age. Their golden treasures and tales of warriors echo through history, but the Scythians themselves seem to melt back into the vast grasslands from which they came. This was not a single, dramatic vanishing act like a city swallowed by the sea. It was a slower, more complex process of cultural fading, a civilization dissolving like a pattern in the shifting sands of the steppe. By the 3rd century before the Common Era, these formidable nomadic horse lords who had dominated the Pontic-Caspian steppe for centuries were no longer a distinct, dominant force. Their disappearance presents a different kind of mystery, one not of a sudden collapse, but of a gradual transformation so complete it leaves historians arguing over the precise moment the Scythian world truly ended. The Scythians were the archetypal nomads of antiquity, masters of the bow from horseback, feared by the Persian Empire and admired by the Greeks for their fierce independence and intricate goldwork. They built no stone cities, but their burial mounds, called kurgans, dot the landscape from the Black Sea to Mongolia, filled with spectacular artifacts that speak of wealth, artistry, and a deep, spiritual connection to their animals and land. So how does such a powerful and pervasive culture simply fade from view? The debate centers on a combination of pressures that slowly eroded their unique way of life, with scholars differing on which pressure proved most decisive. One prominent theory points to the arrival of new rivals on the endless grassland. From the east came another nomadic confederation, the Sarmatians. Linguistically and culturally related to the Scythians, the Sarmatians were nonetheless fierce competitors. They are often described as having a more militarized society, with women participating in warfare, and they employed different tactics and weaponry, including longer lances and heavier armor for shock cavalry. The relentless military pressure from the Sarmatians, and likely other groups, gradually pushed the Scythians from their prime grazing lands in the open steppe. They were compressed into smaller, less viable territories, particularly into the Crimean Peninsula and the forest steppe to the north. This geographic contraction was a critical first step in their dissolution, as it forced them into a more settled, defensive existence that was at odds with their nomadic identity. A second major line of inquiry examines the economic currents that once sustained them. The Scythians were not just raiders, they were crucial middlemen in a vast trade network that connected the Greek Black Sea colonies with the interior of Eurasia. They exchanged grain, furs, and slaves for Greek wine, fine metalwork, and luxury goods. Some researchers suggest that changes in these trade dynamics undermined their economic power. As larger empires like the Hellenistic kingdoms and later Rome established more direct and secure trade routes, the Scythian role as essential intermediaries may have diminished. Their wealth and influence, so tied to controlling this flow of goods, would have waned accordingly, weakening the political cohesion of their confederation. The very environment that defined them may have also turned against them. The steppe is a fragile ecosystem, and the Scythian lifestyle was built on pastoralism, the seasonal movement of herds between pastures. Some climate models suggest a period of increased aridity or climatic instability during the later centuries of Scythian dominance. Even a slight shift toward drier conditions could have reduced the carrying capacity of the grasslands, leading to overgrazing, conflict over scarce resources, and an inability to maintain the large herds of horses and cattle that were the foundation of their wealth and mobility. An ecological stress like this could have made them vulnerable on all fronts, softening their resistance to both military pressure and economic change. Yet perhaps the most profound explanation is not one of defeat but of absorption. The Scythians did not vanish in a genocide or a mass exodus. Instead, through centuries of interaction, conflict, and intermarriage with the Sarmatians, Germanic tribes like the Goths, and later the expanding empires, their distinct cultural identity simply blended into new emerging groups. They were assimilated. A Scythian warrior might have taken up a Sarmatian lance and married into a new tribe, his children learning new customs and speaking a slightly different dialect. Over generations, the unique Scythian language, artistic styles, and social practices faded, becoming threads woven into the broader tapestry of Eurasian history. Their legacy lived on in the cavalry traditions of later steppe empires, in the artistic motifs found from Persia to China, and in the bloodlines of countless peoples, but their political and cultural independence evaporated. So, was it the spear of the Sarmatian, the silence of the trade caravan, the drying of the grassland, or the quiet pull of cultural integration that finally dissolved the Scythian world? The answer likely lies in the confluence of all these forces. Their disappearance teaches us that not all historical endings are catastrophic events. Some are slow transformations, where a people do not vanish from the earth, but instead step into the flowing river of history, their distinct shape dissolving as they merge with the current. The golden stags and panthers from their burial mounds remain, glittering testaments to a culture that chose not to build monuments in stone, but to live in harmony with the endless horizon, until the horizon itself changed around them. The golden legacy of the Scythians faded into the currents of the steppe, a slow cultural dissolution. Yet on the other side of the world, a city of stone met a far more violent and definitive end. In the highlands of central Mexico, the Avenue of the Dead runs straight between the colossal Pyramid of the Sun and the Pyramid of the Moon, a monumental axis built to mirror the cosmos. This was Teotihuacan, the first true metropolis of the Americas. At its zenith around 450 Common Era, it was a bustling, multi-ethnic hub of perhaps 125,000 souls, a place of such awe that 1,000 years later, the Aztecs would find its silent ruins and believe it was built by gods. But the gods had long since departed. Around 550 Common Era, the heart of this magnificent city was violently sacked and set ablaze. The civic and religious buildings along the central avenue were systematically burned, their painted murals scorched and their sculptures smashed. This was not a slow decline, but a targeted, fiery cataclysm that shattered the city's political and spiritual core, leaving a mystery that divides experts to this day. Who would dare to burn the center of the world, and why? The key to the puzzle lies in that very specific destruction. The evidence is clear and dramatic, a layer of ash and charcoal concentrated in the ceremonial precincts, while many residential compounds outside the center were left relatively untouched. This pattern of violence is a crucial clue, but one that archaeologists interpret in starkly different ways. It points to a focused attack, but the identity of the attackers and their motives remain shrouded in the smoke of that ancient fire. One of the most compelling theories looks inward at the city's own social fabric. Teotihuacan was a meticulously planned, rigidly hierarchical society. Its enormous apartment compounds suggest a population divided into distinct districts, possibly by trade or ethnicity, all under the control of a powerful, centralized authority. Some scholars see the burning not as an invasion but as a popular uprising, a class-based revolt against the ruling elite. In this scenario, a disenfranchised populace, perhaps suffering under heavy tribute or religious demands, finally turned on the priests and rulers in their symbolic heart. They targeted the temples and palaces not to conquer the city, but to tear down its ruling structure, a revolution that ultimately left the city without governance and spiraled into chaos. The burning of the central icons was an act of erasure, a deliberate attempt to destroy the legitimacy of the old order. A second, opposing theory points the finger beyond the city's walls. Could external enemies have breached Teotihuacan's formidable defenses? During its peak, the city exerted immense influence across Mesoamerica, with enclaves and evidence of its style found from the Maya region to the northern deserts. This very influence may have bred resentment and fear. Some researchers propose that a coalition of rival cities or migrating groups, seeing Teotihuacan's power perhaps beginning to waver, launched a coordinated attack to plunder its wealth and break its hegemony. The targeted burning of the ceremonial center makes strategic sense in this view. It was a symbolic coup de grace, a way to humiliate and permanently dismantle the source of the city's spiritual and political authority, ensuring it could never rise again. Then there is the environmental explanation, which provides a grim backdrop to either internal or external conflict. Paleoclimate data from lake sediments in the region indicates a series of severe droughts in the 6th century, right around the time of the collapse. For a city of that immense size, dependent on agriculture to feed its masses, prolonged drought would have meant famine, social strain, and desperation. This theory suggests that systemic failure came first, the environmental stress weakening the city from within, making it vulnerable to whichever final blow fell. Did drought spark the revolt as hungry citizens blamed their rulers for the failing rains? Or did it cripple Teotihuacan's military and economic reach, inviting attack from opportunistic rivals? The drought provides a powerful motive force, but on its own, it does not explain the precise, ritualized nature of the destruction along the Avenue of the Dead. Most modern scholars believe the truth lies in a tragic convergence. A prolonged period of drought and food shortages likely created widespread hardship and eroded faith in the ruling class. This internal tension may have fractured the social order, perhaps sparking violent unrest that then left the city disorganized and weak. At that moment of profound vulnerability, external groups, whether old enemies or new migrants, saw their chance and struck, delivering the final, fiery blow to a city already reeling. The burning of the temples was the exclamation point on a long sentence of decline. Teotihuacan's silence afterward was so complete that when the Aztecs wandered into the valley centuries later, they saw only a ghostly landscape of pyramids, a place they named Teotihuacan, meaning the place where the gods were created, having no memory of the mortal kings, the droughts, or the night its cosmic axis was consumed by flames. The city's end forces us to confront a complex equation of disaster, where environmental crisis, social unrest, and the ambitions of outsiders can combine to erase even the mightiest of human creations. The fiery collapse of Teotihuacan was a catastrophe witnessed by stone and ash, leaving a silent city for later cultures to wonder at. But some vanishings happen not on land, but on the open sea, where the only witness is the horizon. In December of 1872, a British merchant brig named the Mary Celeste was found drifting silently in the Atlantic between the Azores and Portugal. She was perfectly seaworthy, her sails partially set, and her cargo of industrial alcohol was largely intact. Yet not a single soul was on board. The captain, his wife, their 2-year-old daughter, and the entire crew of 7 had vanished. The ship's lifeboat was gone, along with the navigational instruments and the ship's papers. A meal, half-eaten, was found on the table in the captain's cabin. There was no sign of a struggle, no evidence of fire or a significant leak, and no clear reason why anyone would abandon a sound vessel in the middle of the ocean. This 19th century maritime mystery has become an icon, a ghost ship story that echoes the ancient human fear of being swallowed by the vast unknown, and it divides researchers just as fiercely as any archaeological puzzle. The heart of the debate is the maddening lack of evidence. The ship itself was a clue, but one that refused to give a straight answer. Every theory proposed must explain why a competent captain would order such a sudden, desperate evacuation into a small lifeboat, an act that was often more dangerous than staying with the ship. One of the most persistent explanations involves the cargo. The Mary Celeste was carrying over 1,700 barrels of denatured alcohol. Some investigators have suggested that a few barrels may have leaked, filling the hold with potent fumes. Fearing an imminent explosion, the captain might have ordered everyone into the lifeboat as a precaution, tethering it to the ship with a line until the air cleared. If that line then snapped in rough seas, the lifeboat would have drifted away, leaving those aboard to the mercy of the Atlantic. This theory of a panicked but rational abandonment fits many of the facts, yet it is contested by others who point out that no barrels showed major damage and that experienced sailors of the era were familiar with such cargoes. Another natural theory points to the weather. Could a sudden, violent waterspout have struck the ship? The impact and noise might have been mistaken for a catastrophic hull breach, spurring a frantic evacuation. Some accounts note that one of the ship's pumps was disassembled, perhaps indicating an attempt to clear water that had been taken on during a freak event. Yet, if a waterspout was powerful enough to scare the crew off, why did it leave the ship's sails and rigging largely undamaged? Then there are the human theories of malice or deceit. The possibility of piracy was raised, but pirates would have likely taken the valuable cargo. Mutiny is another dramatic suggestion, but there was no evidence of violence on board, and mutineers would have presumably kept the far more comfortable ship, not taken to a tiny boat. Some have even proposed an elaborate insurance fraud, though this seems wildly convoluted given the extreme risk. The very ordinariness of the scene is what makes it so chilling and so endlessly debatable. A child's belongings were left behind. The crew's personal effects were still in their quarters. It suggests a departure that was sudden, but not necessarily panicked, perhaps born of a mistaken belief in an immediate, overwhelming threat that never actually materialized. For over a century, the Mary Celeste has sustained speculation precisely because every theory has a flaw, and the empty sea offers no rebuttal. It stands as a modern parable of disappearance, where the mystery is not in ruined walls or buried cities, but in the eerie preservation of everyday life, abruptly and permanently vacated. The debate continues not over artifacts, but over human psychology, asking what single, shared fear could compel 10 people to choose the open ocean in a small boat over the solid deck of their own ship. While ghost ships drift on modern seas, ancient rivers once charted the rise and fall of entire civilizations. In the heart of Central Asia, where the sands of the Kizilkum Desert meet the foothills of the Pamir Mountains, flows the life-giving Zarafshan River. For millennia, its waters carved a fertile corridor known to the ancients as Sogdiana, a land of legendary traders and vibrant cities that became the very crossroads of the Silk Road. Here, the Persian Empire established a wealthy satrapy, a province whose name itself has faded into obscurity. The great cities along this route, like the fabled Samarkand, were not just stops on a map, but cosmopolitan hubs where Zoroastrian, Buddhist, and later Islamic ideas mingled with goods from China to the Mediterranean. Yet this corridor of connection also became a highway of conquest, and its urban centers faced repeated cycles of flourishing and abandonment, leaving behind a haunting question. When a Sogdian city fell silent, was it because an empire's sword cut its trade, or because the river itself, the source of all life, simply decided to change its course? The debate over the lost Persian satrapy of Zaravshan is a story of a landscape caught between the will of kings and the whims of nature. The political tides here were as shifting as the desert sands. Sogdiana was a prized jewel, successively conquered by the Achaemenid Persians, by Alexander the Great, and later by waves of nomadic confederations and the Mongol Empire. Each conquest could bring devastation but also renewal, as new rulers often rebuilt the cities to control the lucrative trade routes. The mystery lies in the specific, quieter disappearances, the times when a thriving urban center was not rebuilt but was instead left to crumble back into the steppe. One school of thought argues that political violence was the absolute and final cause. The Mongols, under Genghis Khan, are famously recorded for their utter destruction of cities like Samarkand and Bukhara in the early 13th century, massacres so complete they were intended to serve as warnings to any who might resist. In this view, the abandonment of a city was a direct human decision, a deliberate act of erasure to break the spirit of a region and secure its wealth. A conqueror could divert trade routes to favor his own new cities, leaving the old commercial hubs to wither and die from economic starvation, even if their physical structures still stood. Yet, other researchers look past the armies and listen to the river. The Zaravshan is not a mighty, unchanging waterway like the Nile or the Indus. It is a more fragile thread, susceptible to the region's seismic activity and prone to shifting its channels across the flat plain over centuries. An earthquake could block or divert its flow overnight. More gradually, the river's course could silt up or slowly migrate, leaving a city's intricate network of irrigation canals, its arex high and dry. A city that was not directly sacked might still be doomed if the water that fed its fields and filled its reservoirs simply stopped arriving. This environmental explanation suggests that many abandonments were not a choice but a necessity. A community could survive a change in political masters, adapting to new taxes and flags, but it could not survive without water. Proponents of this theory point to archaeological sites where the ruins are found kilometers from the modern river, sitting in now barren landscapes that clearly once were fertile. They argue that political collapse might deliver the final blow, but only after environmental stress had already pushed the society to a breaking point, making it unable to resist or recover. The true heart of the debate, however, is untangling this knot of cause and effect. Did the Mongols destroy a city because it was a political threat, or because it was already weakened and vulnerable from a failing water supply, making it an easy target? Conversely, could a major conquest so devastate the social order and kill the skilled engineers who maintain the canals that the water management system itself collapsed, leading to environmental disaster as a second-order consequence? The evidence along the Zaravshan is a palimpsest, where layers of ash from siege fires are found mixed with layers of sediment from catastrophic floods or irrigation collapse. To declare a single cause is to ignore the volatile synergy of this place. It was a corridor where the ambitions of empires and the physics of river hydrology were locked in a constant, delicate dance. A city's disappearance was rarely one event, but a cascade where a shift in trade, a battle lost, and a river's betrayal could conspire to erase a community's reason for being, turning a bustling caravanserai back into silent, sun-baked mud brick, waiting for the next empire or the next river to write a new story upon the land. High in the frozen silence of the Indian Himalayas, a glacial lake holds a secret written in bone. In 1942, a British forest guard stumbled upon a scene of almost unimaginable scale around the shores of Roopkund Lake. Scattered across the rocky basin and even preserved within the ice of the lake itself were the skeletal remains of hundreds of individuals. This was not a formal burial ground, but a vast, open-air resting place over 16,000 feet above sea level. A location so remote and inhospitable it felt like the roof of the world. The initial discovery sent shockwaves through the archaeological community, presenting a macabre puzzle: who were these people, and what brought such a large group to such a deadly place? For decades, the leading theory seemed to emerge directly from the bones themselves. Early forensic examinations noted something peculiar. Many of the skulls showed short, deep cracks, but not the kind typically caused by weapons or falls. Researchers proposed a terrifying scenario: a sudden and catastrophic hailstorm. In the thin air of the high Himalayas, hailstones can grow to the size of cricket balls. A group caught in the open, perhaps pilgrims or traders, would have had no shelter. The theory suggested they were pummeled by a barrage of ice, the blows to the head fatal and swift, their bodies left where they fell, to be preserved by the cold for over 1,000 years. This explanation, a dramatic act of nature, became the accepted narrative for a time, a story of a single, terrible afternoon frozen in time. Yet, as with all great mysteries, further investigation only deepened the enigma. Other theories challenged this natural disaster model. Some local folklore spoke of the lake as a site of ritual significance, leading to speculation that these could be the remains of individuals who undertook a final, sacred journey. Others wondered if a devastating epidemic, like a fast-moving illness, could have struck a traveling group, leaving the survivors too weak to carry on or bury their companions. There was even the possibility of a military disaster, the remnants of a defeated army fleeing into the mountains only to succumb to the elements. Each theory fit some of the evidence, but none fit perfectly. The true revolution in understanding, however, came with modern science, and it did not bring clarity. It shattered the single story entirely. Advanced genetic studies conducted on the bones yielded a result that stunned researchers. The individuals did not come from a single population or even a single time period. Their remains dated from widely separated eras, some from around 800 Common Era, and a larger group from around 1800 Common Era, 1,000 years later. Even more astonishing, their genetic origins were wildly diverse. Some showed ancestry linked to South Asia, as one might expect, but others were closely related to people from the Eastern Mediterranean, modern-day Greece and Crete. This was not one tragic event, but at least two separate catastrophes centuries apart, involving groups from opposite ends of the ancient world. The discovery transformed the mystery and ignited fresh, heated debate. What were individuals from the Mediterranean doing in this remote Himalayan pass so recently in history? One compelling hypothesis suggests they were part of a traveling party, perhaps hired as mercenaries or accompanying a diplomatic mission, or even a group of pilgrims drawn to the sacred sites of the region. The how of their death remains contested. The hailstorm theory still applies to the later group, but the why of their presence is a profound historical riddle. The genetic data also forced a re-evaluation of the site's nature. Could Roopkund Lake have been a known, albeit perilous, thoroughfare, a shortcut that claimed lives in different centuries? Or does its location on a known pilgrimage route suggest these diverse groups were all drawn by faith, meeting the same fatal end on the same haunted ground? The skeletons of Roopkund no longer tell a simple tale of a freak storm. They whisper a far more complex story of long-distance travel, cultural interconnection, and repeated human tragedy high above the tree line, where the thin air holds onto secrets for centuries, revealing them only in fragments that divide those who seek to listen. While the Himalayas held their frozen secrets, another society was mastering a different kind of water in a landscape just as demanding. In the blistering heart of the Sonoran Desert, where the sun bleaches the earth and rain is a rare promise, the Hohokam culture performed a miracle of hydraulic engineering. For over 1,000 years, from around 300 to 1450 Common Era, they transformed the Salt and Gila River valleys into a green oasis. Their cities, like the sprawling complex at Snaketown, were hubs of activity, marked by platform mounds and ball courts for a ritual game echoing those of Mesoamerica. But their true genius lay beneath the surface, in the most extensive and sophisticated irrigation system in prehistoric North America. They dug hundreds of miles of canals, some over 10 feet deep and 30 feet wide, channeling precious river water to fields of maize, beans, and cotton. This was a society built on absolute control over a scarce resource, a triumph of collective will over a harsh environment. And then, by the mid-15th century, the canals fell silent. The great villages were largely abandoned, and the Hohokam as a distinct cultural identity faded from the archaeological record. Their disappearance is not a mystery of a single catastrophe, but a slow unraveling of a delicate balance, and the debate centers on what finally tipped the scales. The evidence points overwhelmingly to environmental stress, but how that stress translated into social collapse is where interpretations fiercely diverge. One of the most compelling theories arises from their very success. The irrigation that gave them life carried a hidden, slow-acting poison, salt. When river water is used to irrigate fields in an arid climate, the water evaporates, leaving behind dissolved salts in the soil. Over centuries of intensive farming, this salinization can gradually build up until the land becomes toxic to crops, reducing yields year after year. Could the Hohokam have literally sown the seeds of their own decline, their engineering prowess inadvertently poisoning the fields that fed their civilization? This is a powerful narrative of a society trapped by its own ingenuity, but it is not the only environmental threat they faced. The desert is a place of extremes, and their complex canal network was vulnerable to the very rivers it harnessed. Geological evidence suggests the region experienced episodes of massive flooding during the Hohokam's later centuries. A single, catastrophic flood event could have breached critical sections of the canal headgates, scouring out channels and filling others with silt and debris. Repairing such damage would have required a monumental, coordinated effort. If a series of floods struck in quick succession, or if social cohesion was already fraying, the task may have become impossible, severing the literal lifeline of entire communities. Then there is the broader climatic shadow that falls over so many of these stories: drought. Tree ring data from the region confirms a period of severe, prolonged drought in the late 13th and 14th centuries, right before the cultural dispersal. For a society living on the razor's edge of water availability, a multi-decade drought would have been devastating. The rivers that fed their canals would have shrunk to a trickle, and the elaborate system, for all its sophistication, would have been drawing from a nearly empty well. Could generations of hardship from failing rains have simply exhausted the social will to maintain their complex way of life? Yet, environmental explanations, while powerful, do not fully satisfy every researcher. Some archaeologists look at the evidence and see not a collapse but a transformation. They point to signs that in their final phases, the large, centralized Hohokam villages began to break apart. People moved into smaller, more dispersed settlements in the surrounding hills and mountains. This could indicate a deliberate social reorganization, a choice to abandon the risky, labor-intensive irrigation economy for a more flexible, diversified lifestyle of dry farming, hunting, and gathering. In this view, the Hohokam did not vanish, they adapted. Their knowledge and people likely blended with neighboring groups, such as the Ancestral Puebloans to the north, contributing to the cultural tapestry that would become the historic Pima and Tohono O'odham peoples. This theory reframes the abandonment of the Great Canal networks not as a failure, but as a strategic retreat from an unsustainable system under mounting pressure. The central debate, therefore, is one of cause and effect. Did salinization and drought create an inescapable environmental trap, forcing a desperate dispersal? Or did a changing climate and damaged infrastructure first trigger a social crisis, a loss of faith in the centralized authority that managed the water, leading communities to consciously choose a different, more resilient path. The silent, sun-baked canals of the Sonoran Desert offer no verdict, only the profound lesson that even the most brilliant human systems exist in a fragile conversation with the natural world, a conversation that can, over time, become a conversation with silence. Deep within the shifting sands of the Tarim Basin, in what is now Western China, the desert performed a miracle of preservation. Here, the sands revealed not ruins but people. The mummies discovered at sites like Churchen and Lulan are startlingly lifelike, with their felted clothing, intricate tattoos, and most strikingly, their European features: red and blonde hair, high noses, and fair skin. These were the Tocharians, an enigmatic Indo-European people who spoke a language lost to time, a branch of the ancient linguistic tree that had somehow taken root in the heart of Asia. For centuries, they thrived in a network of oasis cities, becoming vital way stations on the early Silk Road, where East truly met West long before the term was coined. Yet by the 9th century of the Common Era, their distinct language, culture, and identity had vanished from history. Their physical remains are perfectly clear, preserved by the arid air, but the process of their cultural disappearance is a mystery written in fading ink. How does an entire people, so visibly present, simply fade from the historical record? The debate centers on a slow transformation, a quiet extinction where scholars argue over which pressure proved most decisive. One prevailing theory points to the arrival of new peoples from the steppe. In the 8th and 9th centuries, the Uyghur Turks, a powerful nomadic confederation, moved into the region, establishing their own kingdoms and cultural dominance. The process was likely not a sudden conquest, but a gradual absorption over generations. As Uyghur political power, language, and customs took hold, the Tocharians may have found it advantageous or simply necessary to assimilate. Intermarriage, economic integration, and the adoption of the new lingua franca for trade and administration would have slowly eroded the old Tocharian ways. Within a few centuries, a child of Tocharian descent might have spoken only Uyghur, worshipped new gods, and identified with the new ruling culture, the memory of their unique heritage surviving only in a few ancient manuscripts stored in a monastery attic. Another line of inquiry looks to the economic currents that once sustained them. The Tocharians were middlemen, their prosperity flowing from the camel caravans that passed through their oasis towns. As the Silk Road evolved, major trade routes could shift due to political instability, the rise of new empires, or the discovery of safer paths. If the Central Asian trade that was their lifeblood began to bypass their cities, their economic reason for being would have withered. A decline in wealth leads to a decline in influence, making it harder to maintain cultural institutions, support monasteries where their language was preserved, or resist the pull of more vibrant neighboring cultures. Their disappearance, in this view, is a story of economic obsolescence, where a people became a detour on a highway that moved on without them. Then there is the silent, persistent pressure of the environment itself. Life in an oasis is a perpetual negotiation with the desert, entirely dependent on fragile water sources from mountain runoff. Climate data suggests periods of increased aridity in Central Asia during the first millennium. If the glaciers feeding the rivers shrank, or if rainfall patterns changed, the Tocharian oases would have contracted. Less water means less agriculture, supporting a smaller population, and increasing competition for dwindling resources. This environmental stress could have sparked internal conflict or made the communities profoundly vulnerable to external pressure, whether from migrants or rivals. It could have also prompted a slow, desperate migration, as families gradually left their drying homes for greener pastures elsewhere, dispersing the population and accelerating assimilation. The haunting beauty of the Tocharian mummies is that they offer no answer to this debate. They show us a people frozen in time, but not the centuries of change that followed. Their exquisite tapestries and manuscripts in a forgotten script tell us they were here, but not why they are no longer them. Their story is the ultimate puzzle of cultural extinction, where a people do not perish, but are instead woven into a new tapestry, their original colors blending until the pattern is lost, leaving us to wonder at the single, preserved thread and the vast, complicated loom of history upon which it was once part of a brilliant and vanished design. The perfectly preserved faces of the Tocharian mummies are a testament to the desert's power to remember what history has forgotten. But in the dense, steaming jungles of Central America, the opposite is true. Here, the land does not preserve, it consumes. Vines strangle stone, roots crack foundations, and torrential rains wash away all trace of human passage within generations. It is in this green, devouring wilderness that one of the last great terrestrial exploration myths persisted into the 21st century, the legend of La Ciudad Blanca, the lost city of the monkey god. For centuries, Spanish conquistadors and later explorers told tales of a magnificent white-walled city, hidden deep within the nearly impenetrable Mosquitia region of Honduras. It was a place of immense wealth, they said, abandoned and waiting, guarded by spirits and deadly snakes. These stories fueled countless expeditions, most ending in failure, malaria, or simply more tantalizing rumors. The jungle seemed to actively guard its secret, making the very existence of such a place a matter of fierce debate between romantic adventurers and skeptical archaeologists. Then, technology offered a new way to see through the canopy. Using LiDAR, the same laser scanning that revealed Angkor's true scale, researchers mapped the Mosquitia from the air. What the sensors revealed was not a single city, but something arguably more significant, the unmistakable geometric imprint of human civilization. Beneath the unbroken green carpet, the LiDAR images showed terraces, plazas, irrigation channels, and what appeared to be pyramidal structures, all arranged across not just one site, but several within a vast, unexplored valley. This was not a lone settlement. It was evidence of a complex pre-Columbian society that had flourished and then vanished, completely outside the known historical narratives of the Maya or Aztec. The subsequent ground expeditions confirmed it. Archaeologists hacking their way into the valley, now called the Valley of the Lost City, found stone sculptures, ceremonial seats, and extensive earthworks, all untouched by looting and dating to between 1000 and 1500 Common Era. The discovery was monumental, yet it immediately fractured into a new debate. Was this specific cluster of ruins the legendary White City of the conquistadors' dreams, or were those dreams always just a metaphor for a broader, unknown civilization now coming to light? This question divides the interpretation of the find. Some researchers and popular accounts eagerly linked the discovery to the specific legend, noting the presence of light-colored stone and the remote, mythic quality of the place. Others within the scholarly community urge extreme caution. They argue that the legend of a single, glittering lost city is a European trope, a story pattern imposed on a landscape that actually held a network of settlements. For them, the true discovery is not Ciudad Blanca, but proof of a previously unknown cultural sphere in Central America, a society with its own traditions and scale that rewrites the map of pre-Columbian history. This civilization, whatever its name, clearly met an end. The excavations show it was abandoned long before European contact, with no evidence of a violent conquest. So why did the builders leave? Once again, theories circle the familiar trinity of ancient disappearances. Some point to environmental strain, as the society's need for cleared land may have led to deforestation and soil depletion in a fragile rainforest ecosystem. Others see potential signs of social conflict or warfare between sites in the region. But a compelling and poignant theory involves an unseen enemy, disease. While the cities were abandoned before Spaniards physically arrived, their pathogens may have traveled faster. epidemics of smallpox or measles, spreading inland from coastal contacts decades ahead of the explorers themselves, could have devastated the population, causing a societal collapse so rapid it would have seemed like a vanishing to any later arrivals. The jungle would have rushed back into the void, leaving only stories of a place where people simply disappeared. The ongoing work in the Mosquisha is a delicate dance between legend and science. Every carved figure raised from the leaf litter is a piece of a real history that is far more interesting than any fable, a story of innovation and adaptation in a brutal environment. Yet the power of the myth persists, forcing us to ask whether we search for lost cities to find gold, or to find the deeper truth that our world still holds entire chapters of the human story, waiting silently beneath the green, ready to divide those who seek them from those who are content with the map as it is currently drawn. Their story ends not in a forgotten city or a sunken coast, but in the quiet of a cave and in the very blueprint of our own bodies. The final fate of the Neanderthals is the most intimate disappearance of all, for it involves not a stranger but a cousin. For hundreds of thousands of years, these robust, intelligent hominins thrived across Europe and Western Asia, mastering their icy world with sophisticated tools, complex hunting strategies, and even symbolic thought, as suggested by evidence of cave art and personal adornment. Then, roughly 40,000 years ago, their fires guttered out, as our own species, Homo sapiens, spread across the same landscapes. The Neanderthal presence faded until they were gone. This was not a sudden event, but a gradual retreat into silence over millennia. The question that now divides scientists is not simply what happened, but what weight to give the forces that led to their end. It is a debate that forces us to confront our own past and the nature of our arrival in a world already occupied. The traditional narrative, long held in textbooks, was one of direct competition and replacement. In this view, Homo sapiens arrived from Africa as a cognitively superior species, armed with more advanced technology, more complex social structures, and perhaps even a more sophisticated language. We outcompeted the Neanderthals for the same resources: food, shelter, prime hunting grounds, leading to their gradual decline and extinction. Some interpretations of this theory even suggest open conflict, a prehistoric displacement where our ancestors were the ultimate victors. This idea of a zero-sum game where one species must lose for the other to win is intuitive and dramatic, but modern evidence paints a far more nuanced and interconnected picture. A powerful counterpoint to that old narrative looks not at us but at the sky. The period of the Neanderthals' decline was one of profound climatic chaos. The last ice age was not a steady deep freeze, but a roller coaster of severe, rapid climate oscillations. Temperatures could swing dramatically within a single human lifetime, transforming forests into tundra and back again. Neanderthals were physically adapted to cold, stable climates, with their stout, heat-conserving bodies suited for ambush hunting in wooded environments. This new world of unpredictable, whiplashing change may have placed them under immense stress. Their smaller, more isolated populations, already living in challenging conditions, might have lacked the flexibility or the social networks to adapt as quickly as the situation demanded. In this light, their disappearance becomes a tragedy of timing, a highly specialized species caught in a climatic vise just as a new, more adaptable competitor entered the scene. Yet, the most revolutionary evidence comes from within us. Genetic science has revealed a stunning truth. Many people of non-African descent carry a small percentage of Neanderthal DNA in their genomes. This is not a trace of distant shared ancestry, but the clear signal of interbreeding. Our ancestors and Neanderthals met, coexisted, and had children together. This discovery fundamentally reshapes the entire conversation. It introduces a third possibility beyond competition or climate: assimilation. Perhaps the Neanderthal disappearance was not an extinction in the classic sense, but a gradual absorption into the larger, expanding population of Homo sapiens. Over generations, through interbreeding, their distinct genetic and physical identity may have simply dissolved into ours. They did not vanish, they became part of us. This theory transforms the narrative from one of replacement to one of merging. So, which was it? The current and most widely accepted view in paleoanthropology is that all these factors played a role. It was likely a perfect storm. A climatically unstable world stressed Neanderthal populations, making them more vulnerable. The arrival of Homo sapiens introduced new competitive pressures for resources and possibly new pathogens to which Neanderthals had no immunity. And throughout this challenging period, interbreeding occurred, gradually blending their lineage into ours. The heated debate today is not about which factor existed, but about which one was the primary driver. Was climate the decisive blow that weakened them beyond recovery? Or was the presence of Homo sapiens the new variable that tipped a fragile balance? The genetic evidence proves assimilation happened, but was it frequent enough to be a major mechanism of their disappearance, or just a rare footnote in a story dominated by other pressures? The silent caves where Neanderthals once sheltered hold no verdict. Their tools and hearths tell us they were here, capable and resilient. Their legacy, however, is not confined to stone. It lives on in the DNA of billions of people, a ghost in our genetic code. Their story is the ultimate ancient disappearance because it asks us to look in the mirror and wonder, did we outcompete our cousins, or did we, in the most profound way, welcome them home? The answer remains buried in the layers of time and in ourselves, a reminder that the deepest mysteries are often those we carry within. These 30 stories of silence, from Roanoke to the Neanderthals, share a profound and humbling truth. They remind us that history is not a solved puzzle, but a conversation held in fragments. Across continents and millennia, the pattern repeats itself. A civilization or a community reaches a peak, and then the thread of its story simply frays and snaps. Yet the most compelling insight from all these cases is not the fact of their vanishing, but the enduring debate they inspire. Why, after decades of digging and decades more of analysis, do these ancient disappearances still fracture expert opinion so completely? The answer lies in the very nature of the evidence left behind, and in our own human minds. First, the record is always incomplete. Archaeology works with what survives, and what survives is often a cruel tease. A single word carved in a post, a layer of ash without a weapon, a script we cannot read. The sand swallows armies, the jungle consumes cities, and the sea claims ports whole. What remains is a handful of clues from which we must reconstruct an entire world, its politics, its fears, its final bad day. This scarcity of data creates a vacuum, and into that vacuum rush competing interpretations, each trying to connect the same few dots into a coherent picture. Was it drought or invasion that emptied the Maya cities? The climate data and the hieroglyphs of warfare both scream for attention, but neither provides a definitive sequence of collapse. The evidence is real, but it is also maddeningly ambiguous, open to multiple, equally valid readings depending on which piece a scholar chooses to prioritize. This leads to the second great divider, the human need for narrative. We are storytellers by nature. We crave cause and effect, a clear beginning, middle, and end. We want to know if it was the volcano or the Mycenaean that ended the Minoans, if the Greenland Norse were stubborn or simply unlucky. We seek a villain, a cataclysm, a single turning point. But history, especially prehistory, is rarely so neat. These disappearances were likely the result of cascading failures, a fragile interplay of environmental stress, social tension, economic shift, and plain misfortune. To isolate one cause is often to oversimplify a complex systemic breakdown. The experts argue because the story is too messy for a single plotline, forcing them to weigh which factor in that cascade was the heaviest. the spark that lit the tinder, knowing full well the tinder itself had been piling up for generations. But let us be clear, these divisions are not a sign of failure, quite the opposite. They are the engine of historical and archaeological discovery. Every new theory, every challenge to an old assumption pushes research forward. The search for the Persian army drives us to scan deserts with radar. The debate over Clovis spear points fuels advances in climate science and geology. The mystery of the Tocharian mummies unlocks secrets of ancient DNA and migration. These enduring questions ensure that the past is never a closed book, but a living field of inquiry, constantly being rewritten with each new technological tool and each fresh perspective. They force us to question our assumptions, to look harder, and to remain humble in the face of what we do not know. In the end, these 30 vanishings hold up a mirror to our own world. They speak to the incredible fragility of even the most mighty civilizations, whose monumental achievements can be undone by a changing climate, a shifted trade route, or a lost harvest. They remind us that permanence is an illusion, and that all human endeavors exist in a delicate balance with nature, with neighbors, and with their own internal contradictions. Yet they also testify to the enduring power of the unknown. It is the blank spaces on the map, the unanswered questions in the chronicle, that compel us to explore, to dig, and to wonder. They are the shadows that make the light of history so vivid. So we turn the question to you, after this journey through the lost, which of these great disappearances lingers in your mind? Which silent city, which vanished people makes you lean in and ask what truly happened here? Share your thoughts below and keep the conversation and the search alive.